Chapter 804. City of the Dwarves. The country of Dalgaram is an enormous country with a population mainly consisting of dwarves. Bordered between wasteland to the north, a canal to the south, tall mountains to the east, and a huge sea to the west, the country of Dalgaram mainly lived off blacksmithing and woodcrafting. Dalgaram itself was mainly covered in large hills and had a hot climate, which had led to a freely spread population. Despite the number of dwarves, most of them lived in small villages. The country's landscape was quite frightening. Withered flower fields, bleak, bare forests, and smelly, overgrown ponds were just a sliver of the harshness Dalgaram had to offer, which was why the country was unpopular among foreigners. The dwarves of Dalgaram were unwelcoming towards foreigners, especially toward the elves, and tended to welcome them with bitterness. They felt foreigners were a disease to the kingdom. At that moment, a young lady with golden hair left a black carriage and headed deeper into the forest. A long sword dangled on her back, complementing the silver armor she was wearing. "Don't take too much time," a thick, bitter voice resonated from the carriage. Yeah. The woman rolled her eyes as she walked into the forest without giving a damn about the carriage or the person inside. Annoying little twat. What did I do to deserve such an asshole for a client? The woman bickered with herself. The passive and daunting forest around her had the appeal of a forgotten land, which had been lost in time. The isolated forest remained in a capsule, untouched by the destructive essence of man. The dark shadows of the voluminous trees and puzzled bushes had become the structure of the forest. All the giant trees in the forest stood proud and tall as protectors of the exigent grounds, as the impregnated bushes that had consumed the hard regions of the forest concealed the land from beneath the dynamic portals of the open sky. The woman needed some time away from her client to clear her mind. She was afraid that if she spent any more time in the carriage with him, she might draw her sword and cut his head off. Standing before a large tree, she looked left and right. Then she punched the tree as hard as she could. The tree trembled, shedding its leaves. Her punch formed a hole in the tree. "That's quite an anger you're holding." The woman felt a chill running down her spine when she heard a devilish voice from behind. She turned around with her sword in her hand. To her surprise, a figure dressed in complete black stood before her. The power that radiated from her body made the woman tremble. "A half-immortal," the woman mumbled. Her grip around the sword loosened. Their cultivation gap was huge as she was at the soul-refining stage, and the black figure was at the half-immortal stage. If they fought, there was no chance for her to defeat the black figure. "I am not here to hurt you," said the black figure. "On the contrary, I am here to make a deal with you. A deal you might gladly accept." As a mercenary for hire, the woman liked the sound of the word deal. Controlling the overwhelming fear in her heart, the woman managed to speak. "What kind of deal?" "Simple," the black figure shrugged. "I will give you 300,000 gold coins for you to leave and never turn back." The woman's eyes glistened with joy, but soon the glimmer faded out. She couldn't believe someone would pay 300,000 for no reason. But then the black figure tossed a space ring toward her. The woman instinctively caught the ring. "Check it out," said the black figure. When the woman sent a sliver of arch energy into the space ring, her eyes widened. She saw stacks of gold coins within the space ring. If she had to guess, she would say the stack contains 300,000 gold coins. "I'm not very patient. So take the ring and leave, or I will take your life. The choice is yours." The woman's heart skipped a beat when she heard these words. "I will take the ring," the woman quickly said without taking any time. "Good. Close the deal." With a handshake, the black figure slowly approached the woman. The latter did not back away in fear, because if the half-immortal wanted her dead, she would be dead by now. Hence, she held her ground firmly. When the black figure arrived at arm-reaching distance from her, she reached out to shake her hand. The woman slowly shook her hand as she felt a sting in her hand. After shaking her hand, the black figure turned around and left. The woman was bewildered. However, she was able to heave a sigh of relief. With the space ring filled with 300,000 gold coins, the woman could settle down somewhere and live the rest of her life peacefully. There was no need for her to risk her life, protecting scums like her current client. The black figure then slowly removed the cloak and hood, revealing her face. It was none other than Gaia. She then flicked her wrist as a ceramic mask appeared in her hand. When she shook the woman's hand, she took a drop of blood from her hand. Gaia dropped the drop of blood onto the ceramic mask. Then she placed the mask on her face. Soon, the ceramic mask trembled as it merged with Gaia's face, turning her into a woman who resembled the mercenary Gaia met a second ago. Gaia planned to take the woman's place from the beginning, one way or another. Now that she had changed her face, she then proceeded to look the part. Thanks to Titus and Optimus, who were in charge of acquiring items for the Order, Gaia managed to get a replica of the woman's silver armor. With a flick of her wrist, she changed the black armor. Eventually, Gaia returned to the carriage she was following behind. Inside the carriage, there was someone who could get her in touch with someone from Han Torum. To pretend to be the mercenary, Gaia needed one last thing to change: her cultivation. Thanks to Michael, she had a special rune that could mimic the energy radiation of a soul refiner. It was a pale blue rune that glistened on her palm before fading away. After everything was said and done, Gaia returned to the carriage, where she met a couple of dwarves drinking and pissing. They seemed to have no shame or care. The dwarf she was about to meet was called Valmos. According to Gaia's sources, Valmos was a weapons dealer and was on his way to Dalgaram to get his hands on the new contraption the dwarves of Han Torum had built. The dwarves snickered and spat on the ground, showing their hatred toward a human. Gaia paid no mind to the dwarves as she opened the carriage door. Inside the carriage, a beefy dwarf with hardly any neck drinking to his throat. He used his long bushy brown beard to clean his hand. When he noticed the woman, a strange smile emerged on his face. As far as Gaia trailed the dwarf, she could tell the dwarf had no interest in women as he had in gold coins. Simply put, the dwarf loved gold coins more than anything. He was even fueling several wars so he could trade weapons with them and get rich. There you are. Took your sweet little time, eh? I am not paying you to protect the tree's love, said the dwarf. Spit and ale splat out of his mouth as he talked. If I am protecting something else and not you, you would have been dead by now. Gaia rolled her eyes. Since she was following the carriage and the woman for 5 days, she knew how the woman would have responded to the dwarf's comment. Ha! The dwarf burst into laughter after hearing her answer. Then he wiped off his mouth with a cloth and gestured at Gaia to climb inside the carriage. Move your asses. It's time to resume our journey toward Embercrest. The dwarf raised his voice as Gaia sat beside the dwarf. The carriage slowly moved. Gaia took out the silver sword resembling the woman's and sharpened it in the carriage. Looking at the shiny blade, the dwarf kept his distance from Gaia. Their journey was uneventful as no one targeted the dwarf. Eventually they arrived at the city of Embercrest. The city of Embercrest was built at the base of a mighty mountain and was truly a true modern curiosity. Its appearance was matched by the backdrop of majestic mountains, which have helped shape the city into what it is today. The riches these mountains and the mines in these mountains brought were of great importance. Still, they were also influential when it came to architectural designs, as the vast majority of buildings had been built alongside the mountains and often incorporated many different ores from the mines. The skyline was packed with unique buildings, and a lot of them seemed to have evolved throughout the ages. Daily life wasn't too stressful in Embercrest despite the lack of powerful cultivators. The dwarves substituted the cultivators with contraptions and engineering marvels. As Gaia looked through the window, she noticed the dwarves carrying rocks in a bag on their backs. These dwarves were heading for the city from one of the mines. Since the pavement was paved with stones, their ride was smooth and bumpless. Stone walls surrounded the entire city. In the distance, she saw some giant gears rotating under the waterfall. She read and heard that the dwarves produce lightning energy to power up the city instead of runes and orbs like the rest of the world. Something told her these gears and the waterfall played a big part in the power generation. I love the smell of Embercrest. Home sweet home, the dwarf laughed. The further they traveled, the more dwarves Gaia saw on the street. Finally they reached the city gates. To her surprise, she saw a carriage with the symbol of Guardian Guild engraved and went past them into the city. Chapter 805. Thieving Dwarves and a Weapons Dealer. Valmos, the weapon-dealing dwarf, had 5 bodyguards. 3 dwarves and 2 humans. All of them were at the soul refining stage. In dwarven nations, soul refining stage warriors were like gods. The strongest dwarven warrior in all dwarven kingdoms was at soul refining stage level 5, and he served under Drogon, the dwarf king. Furthermore, Valmos had a secret hideout that even his bodyguards had no idea of. He would use a teleportation scroll to get in and out. Hence, why he survived for so long despite being one of the most wanted dwarfs and a weapons dealer. The streets of Embercrest were bustling with dwarves, with the air smelling like freshly brewed ale and piss. Everywhere Gaia turned, she saw the dwarves in clusters, drinking and laughing like it's none of anyone's business. Contrary to the elves, the dwarves seemed simple and honest. The dwarves were hot-headed and honest folks compared to the elves, who were always scheming and using curses for hunting down their enemies. But that didn't mean all the elves were bad and all the dwarves were good. Both sides had bad apples, really bad apples. As Gaia was following behind Voms while keeping him close like a good bodyguard should, she noticed a couple of people following them. Even in the crowd, Gaia was skilled enough to spot her followers. Did I say how much I love the smell of the air? Feels like home. Now who should I kill to get some freshly brewed Embercrest ale? Valmos joined the dwarves in laughing out loud. Hold your horses, Valmos. We've been followed. Gaia's words immediately stopped Valmas' laughter. She felt good ruining his jolly mood. The 3 dwarven bodyguards looked dumb while the other human man with rune-engraved bow and arrows looked vigilantly around him. Don't look back, Gaia warned the others. Are they stronger than you dimwits? Asked Valmos. It'd be better if we find your room soon, said Gaia. It's just around the corner. The place is called the Drunken Whore. Fucking hell. Gaia rolled her eyes as they turned around the corner to see a dazzling place totally opposite to its name. The place glistened with neon light and toe-tapping music. Although it was daytime, the dark rainy clouds gave enough darkness for the neon lights to really shimmer. Countless dwarves stood in neat lines to get inside with their dates. In between the 2 lines was a red carpet and a few people received the VIP treatment by entering the Drunken Whore without waiting. Simply put, this place was the fantasy version of nightclubs. Apparently, Valmos seemed to have the VIP card. He flicked his wrist as a golden plate appeared in his hand. But he stopped before getting closer to the place. Where are you coming, darling? Valms turned around and asked Gaia. Inside. She tilted her head. Nope. You are going to deal with those assholes who've been following us, or do you say? I want their heads. Valmas' eyes glistened with killing intent. What are you waiting for? I am paying you to do what I say, not to gawk like a dumb chicken. Gaia wanted to strangle the dwarf, but she managed to control her inner rage. The rest of you follow me inside. Valmos gestured as the others followed him behind before throwing a "you deserve it" look at Gaia. Azazel, I am moving away from the dwarf. Monitor him, Gaia said to Azazel through the earpiece while walking away from Valmos. Got it, Dark Queen? Azazel acknowledged her order and focused on the spider on Valmos himself. After separating herself from Valmos, Gaia entered a dark alley between 2 tall buildings. She noticed several dwarves on the ground, too drunk to get up. With quick steps and leaps, Gaia reached the top of the building. As a human among dwarves, she stood out like a watchtower. Trailing her followers in her current state would only put a bigger target on her back. That was the reason she chose to get on top of the building. Regardless of the size of the dwarves, their buildings were surprisingly tall and unguarded. Thanks to the buildings being in a cluster, she leaped from one building to another. Eventually, she spotted the dwarves who had followed her earlier. The dwarves were gathered in a group and gawking at the Drunken Whore from a safe distance. Poor souls failed to notice Gaia straight on top of them, watching them like a hawk. How do we get inside? I for one cannot stay in the line. No shit. By the time we get inside, he would disappear like he always does. Gaia saw 5 dwarves conspiring against Valmos. Yet she didn't know the reason. To be honest, these dwarves seemed harmless to her. The one who looked like the leader had straps of white in his long bushy beard, and he was the strongest among them, a core formation level 3 warrior. Even if the entire group went against Valms, they would stand a chance against a single bodyguard, let alone all of them. We cannot let him sell the blueprints. Once they get out, who knows how many people will die. The leader dwarf stuttered. Judging by their looks and words, Gaia thought these dwarves were innocent and almost formulated a lie to tell Valmos about their bodies. However, her thoughts were shattered by what they said next. Who cares? We aren't here to save people. We are here to get our money. I almost died snatching those plants. If anything, I should have gotten a bigger cut. Don't be ridiculous. I was the one who found the location of his workshop, said another dwarf. Stop following around, you morons. None of us got paid, not a single coin. That bastard has to pay us with coins and with blood if we played our cards right, said the leader of these little dwarven thieves. Let's get to our safe house and plan our next move. I have someone on the inside who could tell us where Valmos would be next, said another dwarf. Azazel, anything hot happening with Valmos? Asked Gaia as the dwarves began to dismantle their group. Nothing so far, my lady. He's just drinking and dancing with dwarven ladies. I don't think he would be able to do anything for a few hours judging by the amount of booze he drank, said Azazel. The demon was quite surprised by Valmas' ability to drink gallons of ale and stay awake. Good. I am trailing some dwarves who might have some interesting insights. Happy hunting, Dark Queen. I will keep you updated on Valmas' status, said Azazel as Gaia trailed the dwarves to their hideout. The tables had changed as it was Gaia who followed the dwarves this time. While she was following them, Gaia noticed the dwarves looking behind to see if anyone was following them, a trait of a thief. She was certain that these dwarves were thieves, but the question was whether they were working for someone or alone. The city of Embercrest was built like a labyrinth. There were more alleys and turns than straight streets and more taverns than any other stores. Luckily, no one was on top of the buildings or watching the skies. Otherwise, they would have seen Gaia jumping from building to building, parkour style. After almost jumping from building to building for 15 minutes, Gaia reached the outskirts of Embercrest, where the infamous dwarves liked to live. This area before her had no tall buildings or lavish stores. Instead, all she could see were tiny huts and clusters and dirty river running across them. Gaia was standing atop the last tall building overlooking the outskirts. One more step and she would be visible to all the dwarves on the ground. Even if she could sneak without getting detected, she doubted she would fit inside one of those huts. They were barely 4 feet tall. Thanks to Michael's inventions, she had a drone at her disposal. With a flick of her wrist, she took out a drone the size of her palm. It was transparent, as the wire and gears inside were visible to the naked eye. The back of Gaia's neck let out a dim light when the drone started to fly upward. This glimmer of light was a chip that allowed Gaia to control the drone without his or Azazel's help. On top of that, this tiny drone was specially made for her as his gift. It was fast, soundless when flying, and equipped with various types of gases to deal with enemies lethally and non-lethally. "Fly, my beautiful night owl." Gaia controlled the drone to fly ahead. "I need to work on my naming skills," said Gaia, watching the drone fly toward the dwarves. Suddenly, everything the drone saw popped up in the corner of her vision. "This is how he feels, ha." Gaia thought about Michael controlling several drones at the same time. The drone swooped into the hut through a fist-sized hole. The dwarves were too busy searching for mugs and booze. A sane person wouldn't live in the hut for a minute. It looked shabby, dirty, and housed countless cockroaches. Yet, the dwarves didn't seem to mind their house guests. Instead, they filled their mugs and took them to the only piece of furniture that looked relatively new, a table. The dwarves sat around the table to discuss their future plans. They had no idea a drone was hovering above them, listening and watching them. Before they uttered a word, each took a large gulp of ale and didn't bother to wipe their mouths. "When will we receive intel from your source?" a dwarf asked. "He can't fly here, moron. He has a pet owl that would bring the intel to us. We just have to wait," said the leader. "Let me guess. Your source is a human. A damned elf would use magic mumbo-jumbo. Any decent dwarf would use a crawler. But only a human would do something so stupid." The dwarves laughed. "Don't be too hard on my contact. Without him, we aren't getting near Valmas." It didn't take a genius to figure out the dwarf's inside contact. Because the only human Valmas had around him was her and another bodyguard. But Gaia could care less about him. The only thing she needed from the dwarves was what they sold to Valmas. Chapter 806. Death Kiss Crossbow's Eye. After waiting an entire hour for the dwarf's contact to arrive, Gaia lost her patience. Azazel had already warned her that Valmas was cleaning himself for some reason. "Time to deal with the dwarves," Gaia sighed as she stood up from the floor. With a single leap, she shot into the air and dived down like a breezing wind. No dwarves were able to see her until she broke through the roof. The dwarves were completely caught off guard. They squealed and jumped back like scared cats. "Wh the fuck are you?" "You are trespass dash." The dwarves' words choked as they sensed her cultivation. Gaia waved her hand as a translucent dome appeared around them. The shield prevented any sounds from getting out. She didn't want the dwarves to scream for help. Although she could take down the entire kingdom single-handedly, it was neither her intention nor worth her time. "So which one of you assholes is going to tell me what you sold to Valmas?" Gaia scowled. The dwarves gawked at each other, slowly reaching for the short axes dangling on their waists. 4 talented builders, the dwarves were stupid when it came to battle. They would rather fight an unwinnable battle head-on without a strategy than keep calm and plan ahead. Gaia's experience was limited when it came to dwarves. The longest conversation she had with a dwarf was about how to build a defense tower in the floating mountain. Instead of warning the dwarves, Gaia waved her hand as a mighty wind blasted off the dwarves into the walls. The dwarves hit the wall with a thud and fell down, coughing and groaning in pain. Her figure quickly turned blurry. The dwarves saw her completely disappear from their sight. When she returned to where she was a moment ago, the dwarves felt something off. They instinctively reached for their axes but didn't find them. To their surprise, Gaia dropped their axes to the ground. Then she dragged a chair and sat backward, looking at the trembling dwarves. Their big round eyes glistened with anger and shock. But despite their cultivation difference, the dwarves didn't show any fear like anyone else would have. "The man I am working for wants all of you dead. But I am a merciful and reasonable person. Give me what you sold to Valmas and we pretend like this never happened, Gaia talked calmly as the dwarves gawked at each other. They were startled, having no idea how the hell did she know about Valmas and the blueprint they sold to him. Also, Valmas wants you all dead. He would pay me handsomely if I brought him your heads. Either way I am getting paid. The question is, do you want to live or die? Gaia's voice became menacing. Still the dwarves kept their mouths shut. As a result, Gaia lost her patience. She raised her finger as a green laser-like beam shot out of her fingertips. The next thing the dwarves heard was their leader screaming as loud as he could. Blood spurted out of his left knee. The dwarf groaned and cursed to high heaven. You are dead, human. When the news hits the city, our kind will hunt you down, the dwarves snarled at Gaia as she chuckled. Do you really think your kind can stop me? Gaia asked. Perhaps if the dwarves put a quest with the moguls, they might send some soul refiners after her. But the moguls were known for their expensive price and forbidden cultivation techniques. She doubted the kingdom cared enough about some lowly dwarves enough to approach the moguls in the shadows. Unless you want me to target something you treasure, I suggest you give me what I want. The dwarf leader closed his legs as his heart skipped a beat. Seeing Gaia's fingertip glow, the dwarf leader shouted. Wait. I'll give you what you want. The dwarf leader quickly put his hand inside his robes and threw a yellowish parchment to Gaia. You had a copy of the plans all this time, motherfucker? His dwarven buddies were not at all happy about the leader keeping a copy of the plan. If they knew this, they could have tried to sell the plan to someone else rather than wasting their time trailing Valmas. While the dwarves were bickering back and forth, Gaia opened the parchment to see a blueprint of some kind of crossbow. I have to say I am disappointed, Gaia sighed. When she heard the dwarves being so secretive, she thought they sold something powerful to Valmas. But instead it was a blueprint of a crossbow. I can't believe I wasted my time on this. She shook her head disappointedly before putting the blueprint into her space ring. Blueprints and new types of weapons were Michael's thing. Who knows, he might take a weird interest in the thing. After putting the blueprint into her space ring, she stood up from the chair and turned around. She debated with herself whether to kill the dwarves or leave them alive. Honestly, Gaia had no reason to kill them. She could always spin a lie to Valmas about what happened to the dwarves. After a bit of thinking, she decided to leave the dumb dwarves alone. They'll be in the city for a while. So I don't want to see your faces ever again here. Get out? Gaia's voice turned demonic. Her words rang inside their heads until their vision turned blurry. But when she took a step forward to leave the hut, the dwarves made the biggest mistakes of their lives. One daring dwarf threw a pebble at Gaia. It hit her in the head, halting her steps. The dwarves only realized the graveness of their mistake when she turned around with her eyes glimmering with killing intent. At that moment they knew they fucked it up. Gaia grabbed the chair she was sitting on and dragged it toward the dwarves. While the leader dwarf was screaming in pain, the others frantically looked for something that could be used to fight her. Their minds were blank as they didn't even think about using spells. Not that they had powerful spells in their arsenal. All their spells were more focused on picking locks, finding valuables and running away. The drunken whore was just as lively inside as it was on the outside. With neon lights, smoke effects and dancing dwarves, the place was lit with liveliness. Almost everyone inside was dancing to their heart. Valmas was exhausted after dancing and drinking for an hour without a break. He sat in one of the booths built for VIPs. Purple curtains covered the booth and prevented anyone from outside from taking a look inside. Valmas bodyguards flanked the booth from the sides. A while later, Gaia returned to the place. The dwarven bodyguard stopped her in front of the booth. Where is he? Let her inside, moron. Before Gaia could answer the dwarf, Valmas shouted from inside. She entered the booth, pushing aside the dwarf. When she entered the booth, she saw Valmas combing his hair and dusting off his beard. Well, Valmas looked at Gaia, wordlessly asking her about those who followed them. Gaia grabbed the pouch dangling on her waist and poured out its contents on the table before Valmas. The dwarf creased his brows. Some white things were covered in blood, and a handful of hair fell onto the table. Is that tooth? Valmas asked, pointing at a bloody white thing. It took him a few seconds to recognize them. He was no stranger to blood and gory, but even he felt a bit freaked out seeing Gaia pouring down teeth, hair and pieces of flesh onto the table. Moreover, Valmas could see her bloody fist and blood drops on her face. You asked me to bring their heads, but this is all I could find in their bodies after I was done with them. Gaia cracked her fists. After the dwarf hit her with the pebble, Gaia showed them hell on earth. She broke every bone in their bodies and almost killed them. When she was done with them, the dwarves wished for death. They became an outlet for her inner fury. Luckily for the dwarves, she didn't wish to kill them. Otherwise, she wouldn't have given them healing potions and thrown them out of the city herself. Since she was a pretty convincing liar, Valmos believed her without a doubt. Plus, he had more urgent things to worry about than some stupid dwarves. "You seem tense," said Gaia as Valmos sighed. "That obvious, huh? I have an important meeting coming up. This deal can change my life forever." The dwarf put down the wooden comb beside all the teeth and hairballs. He then took out a small piece of paper and handed it down to Gaia. "I need you to go down there and make sure it's not a trap." "Better to be safe than sorry," said Valmos. Gaia took a look at the piece of paper to see the name of an abandoned warehouse not very far from the drunken whore. This place was located in a relatively unpopulated area with plenty of escape routes if things went south. Whoever chose this place knew their stuff. "Will do." Gaia turned around and left the booth without saying anything about the mole and the bodyguards. There was a possibility that Valmos would call off the deal if he felt cold feet after hearing about the mole. Valmos' schedule must go uninterrupted for her to get closer to the new weapons built by Han Torum. He was their only lead to get those weapons. The human bodyguard looked tense as he should be. But Gaia didn't do or say anything that could tip him off. After leaving the drunken whore, Gaia headed straight to the meeting spot. Valmos wanted her to make sure it wasn't a trap, and she wanted to equip the place with enough spiders to record their secret deal. Since the streets were filled with dwarves, she could see to the end of the streets. To her surprise, she noticed the carriage with the Guardian Guild crest parked on an alley near a tavern. Coincidentally, the tavern was called the Mountain Guardian. She would have been more surprised if she knew who was staying inside. Noah Winston. Chapter 807. Death Kiss Crossbows. Black ominous clouds blanketed the naked sky, with rackety thunder rumbles in the distance. Deafening gusts of wind swept across the grassy plains. The dense, mossy foliage writhed in the murky darkness. The cold wind lashed the oak trees, making them wave left and right. Thunder roared more intensely, and one could feel the storm ready to pour at any moment. The place Valmos asked Gaia to check out was an abandoned warehouse used to store steel beams. After navigating through the labyrinth of streets, Gaia could see the building as well as the smashed windows, splintered wooden doors, and a sea of wilting moths all over the walls. The building towered like a dormant volcano amidst the wilderness, surrounded by an aura of misty malevolence. As she walked closer to the warehouse, she noticed more and more cracks in the wall. It was a miracle this place was still standing. Again, the buildings built by the dwarves were known for their resilience. Even natural disasters had a hard time destroying the dwarven buildings. The meeting was not till midnight. Hence, no one was around the place, which gave Gaia enough time to prepare and rig the place with spiders. The rusty, iron gate creaked loudly as she pushed it open. Rotten planks and rusted steel beams lay on the ground like withering corpses, shrouded by layers of soot and mud. Meanwhile, the sky split open as the heavy downpour throbbed against the thatched roof. The echoing sound of water dripping cut through the eerie silence. Gaia covered her head with a hood. The several holes in the roof let the rain droplets find their way into the building. A fallen wooden beam used for the ceiling hung from the roof, swaying in the wind like a pendulum. The wooden floor snapped and creaked every step of the way. Gaia noticed an open space in the middle of the warehouse, surrounded by various machines. All of them were rusted and on the verge of crumbling down. Dried leaves and spider webs decorated these once great machines. With a flick of her wrist, Gaia let out a bunch of spiders. They crawled into every corner of the building. She looked around the warehouse for a few minutes to see if anyone was hiding to ambush Valmos. Her senses and eyes found no one in the building. Only then did Gaia exit the building. The rain was picking up its ferocity. She barely saw the buildings in the distance through the heavy rain. Since she had to report back to Valmos, she flew straight back to the drunken whore. By the time she reached the place, Valmos' carriage was waiting for her. Gaia had a shield around her that prevented her from getting drenched in the rain. She climbed into the carriage. "There you are. Any hiccups?" asked Valmos. "No. The place is clean as far as I can tell. Just keep the teleportation scroll close to your chest in case things go south. I pay you to keep things from going south. What good are you if I have to use a precious teleportation scroll every time there is trouble?" Valmos growled. "You pay me to keep you alive. By the look of it, I'm doing a good job. Besides, you can't bitch about trouble when you are one of the most wanted weapons dealers in the continent." Valmos couldn't argue with that logic. After some bickering, the carriage headed toward the abandoned warehouse. The clattering sound of rain hitting the carriage roof kept them company. Thanks to the paved roads, the ride was quite comfortable and less bumpy. Eventually, the party arrived at the warehouse, and this time, there was another carriage waiting in front of the building. "They are here," Valmos mumbled after stepping out of the carriage. Gaia saw no crest or words on the carriage that could be used to identify the party inside. Instead, the carriage was painted with pure red and no words. She walked beside Valmos along with the other bodyguards. As she got closer to the warehouse, she sensed more and more powerful beings inside. They were too powerful to be dwarves. Gaia quickly willed her mind to show the feed coming from the silent drone inside the warehouse. To her surprise, she saw a group of orcs waiting for them inside. Not in a million years she expected the orcs to come to a weapons deal. Despite their grotesque, terrifying looks, the orcs were a peace-loving race. So Gaia wondered what made the orcs meet Valmos of all people. The door creaked open as the dwarves pushed the steel door. There were wooden crates stacked upon each other beside the orcs. These orcs looked different from those she had met in her life. The orcs tend to keep their bodies void of any inks or tattoos. On the contrary, the orcs in the warehouse filled their bodies with paints and weird designs. In addition, they had piercings on their noses, ears, and even their nipples. They also looked beefier and bulkier than typical orcs. If their looks weren't surprising enough, they were all at the peak of the soul-refining stage except the orc, who had painted his entire body red. Gaia noticed a strange fear on Valmos' face. Although she didn't know Valmos for long, she knew he wasn't the type to get scared quite easily. He couldn't afford to be soft-hearted in his line of business. "Took you long enough," the red orc growled. He literally puffed out smoke from his nostrils like a dragon. It was quite strange and terrifying. Gaia hoped these weird orcs wouldn't find out her true cultivation level. Not that she was afraid of them, but she didn't want the deal to go sideways until she learned more about the weapons built by Han Torum. "My dear friends, I hope you had a pleasant journey to Embercrest." Valmos laughed with open arms. "Stop with the pleasantries, dwarf. Show me the weapons." The orc did not beat around the bush. He cut short Valmos' pleasantries and growled. "Straight to business, eh? I like it." Valmos shrugged off the orc's comment and gestured at them to follow him. The orcs followed Valmos to the wooden crates. When Valmos touched the crate, several runes and chakras glimmered on their surface. For a dwarf who hated elves to the core, he was using elven runes to protect the wooden crates. It didn't surprise Gaia. To a criminal like Valmos, his products and coins were more important than their race's beef with the elves. The wooden crate on top click opened, revealing a bunch of handheld crossbows on top of the hay. These crossbows looked precisely the same as the crossbow Gaia saw on the blueprint. Now she was curious about these tiny crossbows. Judging by the look of them, she couldn't help wondering what they were capable of. "As promised, I present you the Death Kiss crossbows. You can change the name however you want after buying them," said Valmos. 10,000 apiece. I have a total of hundreds of them made for you. As I said in the letter, the blueprint is sold separately. It will cost you 10 million. Before that, I need to see if the weapon does what you claim it would," said the orc. Valmos creased his brows. "I didn't bring any poor saps," said Valmos as a strange devilish grin emerged on the red orc's face. "Let me take care of that," said the orc. He then clapped his hands as the steel door opened once again. They all turned their gazes at the door to see two orcs dragging a few sacks through the muddy ground. The sacks moved and groaned. Each sack contained something alive, squirming inside. For some reason, Gaia had a bad feeling. The orcs picked up the sacks one by one and tossed them a few meters away from Valmos and the orcs. One of the orcs who stood behind the red orc went to the sacks and untied the top. What jumped out of the sacks was none other than the dwarves Gaia almost beaten to death. These stupid dwarves managed to get caught by the orcs. She explicitly made it clear to go through the forest and escape the kingdom. Valmos frowned, looking at the 5 dwarves. "They claim they stole the blueprint that you used to build these crossbows. Let's just say I believe them," said the orc. "What do you have to say for yourself, dwarf?" the red orc asked with his eyes glimmering with murderous glee. "They speak the truth. They stole the plans for me. I am a weapons dealer, not a weapons builder. They don't have the blueprint anymore. I possess the blueprint now," Valum said, throwing his hands in the air. The thieving dwarves were shocked to see Gaia. Fortunately, their mouths were tied with cloth. "They are loose ends that need to be taken care of," the orc spoke in his thick, murderous voice. Then the orc picked up a crossbow and placed it on Valmos' hands. "Take care of them," said the orc before looking over his shoulder at the other orcs for some reason. One of the orcs nodded and went to the dwarves, who were on their knees. The orc murmured something under his breath as a golden shield appeared before each dwarf. Gaia's curiosity was piqued. She didn't worry about the dwarves exposing her identity because if things went south, she could always kill them all. But fortunately, Valmos had no idea the dwarves who followed them and the dwarves before him were the same. Otherwise, he would have been pissed at her for lying to him. Whoa, Valmas threw a fit. I don't get my hands dirty. That's why I have these morons. Valmas' gaze swept across the bodyguards. Let one of my underlings pull the trigger, said Valmas. I don't see any problem with that, said the orc. The thieving dwarves groaned, but no words escaped their mouths. Here, Valmas handed over the crossbow to Gaia. Then he looked at the orc as he nodded. Only then did Valmas take out a steel ball the size of a grape and give it to Gaia. Put that in here. Valmas pointed at the hole on top of the crossbow. When she brought the steel ball close to the hole, an invisible force pulled the steel ball inside. Kill them all, said Valmas as the thieving dwarves groaned louder. The fear for their lives flashed across their eyes. Gaia raised the crossbow, aiming at the dwarves. The crossbow was surprisingly lighter in weight and she really wanted to know what it could do. Come on, pull the trigger, Valmas urged Gaia. Chapter 808. Invitation to Han Torum Auction. Death Kiss crossbow was a masterfully crafted crossbow with a rare sample of willow. Its string was made from deluxe wolf sinew. The wolf sinew was a fairly rare material around these parts of the world. The crossbow's limbs had been decorated with ebony details and ended in long points ornamented with delicate decorations. The stock was wrapped in dark leather and decorated with sigil decorations. In the hands of a master archer such as Gaia herself, this crossbow was capable of firing arrows up to 200 meters while still retaining lethal power. The appearance of the crossbow suggested master craftsmanship. Whoever built the crossbow had to be at least a 4-star blacksmith. Gaia held the crossbow firmly in her hand as her index finger brushed the trigger. With a single pull of the trigger, Gaia could find out why the orcs were so interested in this crossbow. But pulling the trigger meant death for those stupid yet poor dwarves. She herself was curious to see what the crossbow was capable of. The dwarves cried, but no words escaped their mouths. They knew they were staring death in the face. At that moment, they regretted coming out of the forest to steal from Valmas. Greed for gold coins blinded them. As a result, they were about to lose their lives. In her defense, Gaia did warn the dwarves of the danger and gave them a chance to escape. Still, the dwarves managed to get caught. That wasn't her fault. Even if she didn't want to kill the dwarves, sparing them would ruin her disguise and make enemies out of these strange orcs. Despite the orcs' spooky looks, Gaia didn't intend to make enemies out of them. Instead, she wanted to learn more to see if she could recruit them into their army. Furthermore, sparing the dwarves might ruin her chance to learn more about the weapons built by Han Torum, which she couldn't allow to happen. Therefore the dwarves had to die. Finally, Gaia pulled the trigger as the steel ball shot out of the crossbow and exploded midway into countless pellets. The crossbow surprisingly didn't have any recoil. Gaia didn't even feel like she fired a powerful steel ball until she saw the leader dwarf's head explode into a red mist. The blood splattered on the other dwarves as the air reeked of blood. The leader dwarf's headless body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood oozed out of his messed-up neck. Headshot. Valmas shouted excitedly. Everyone was surprised, but what surprised Gaia was how the pellets completely ignored the energy shield. Did you see that? A headshot could kill a core formation warrior despite any defense shields, as I said, Valmas explained, grinning from ear to ear. But not everyone is as good as my sexy bodyguard here, Valmas threw a sly grin at Gaia. He wasn't moving, the red orc growled. He wasn't as impressed as Valmas. The red orc was not wrong. Anyone with a little bit of skill could hit a stationary target from a 5-meter distance. Even a blind man had the chance for a headshot in that short distance. Hey, race another ball. Valmas threw another steel ball and gestured at Gaia to reload the crossbow. The orc threw a dubious look at the dwarf as he tapped the wooden crate. One crate contains all the ammunition you asked for. After reloading the crossbow, Gaia pointed it at another dwarf and pulled the trigger. She had already killed one, so it wasn't a big deal for her to end the others. One by one the dwarves lost their heads. Blood sprayed out from their neck as the orcs looked satisfied. Eventually, the golden shield before the dwarves faded away. The crossbow hooked up Gaia. She didn't use a bit of energy, yet she killed 4 body strengthening stages and 1 core formation warrior despite the energy shield. Now she realized why the orcs were interested in the crossbows. Although Gaia didn't believe these crossbows could do anything to anyone above core strengthening stage warriors, these crossbows could change the tide of war since most wars were fought by soldiers who were mainly at body strengthening stage. When 2 powerful cultivators fought, the Guardian Guild would interfere to broker peace or one of the Great 8 clans. On the contrary, when 2 kingdoms went into war and thousands of soldiers fought, the Guardian Guild ensured the battle was fought in a controlled environment. For instance, when the Duke of Flamefair waged war against Pentown and Icefair, the Guardian Guild did nothing. Gaia had already decided to bring the blueprint to Michael and mass-produce these crossbows. Knowing Michael and his talent for building powerful stuff, Gaia was confident he would make changes to the crossbow and build something extraordinary from the blueprint. After she killed all the dwarves, the Red Orc threw a silver ring at Valmos. The dwarf licked his lips, looking into the space ring. Wonderful, the dwarf clapped his hands together. He then took out a parchment worn out by the time and handed it over to the orc. The Red Orc opened the parchment, took a look at it, and nodded at Valmos. Pleasure doing business with you. Now what about the thing I asked? Valmos kneaded his hands as though he was waiting for something from the orcs. The orc put his hand into the belt around his waist and pulled out a golden card with some letters embossed on it. This will get you inside. Remember, this is the invitation, and whoever holds it gets the right to participate in the auction, said the orc. Gaia glanced over Valmos' shoulder at the golden card. Although the words embossed on the card were nearly unreadable, she was able to make out the words Hontorum. Connecting the dots, Gaia realized she was one step closer to getting the weapons built by Hontorum. The Red Orc signaled his underlings to carry the wooden crates and follow him to the carriage outside. While the orcs were clearing out the crates, Valmos stared at the golden card in his hand with his eyes sparkling. Eventually, the orcs left the warehouse with the crates, leaving Valmos and his bodyguards behind. Gaia waited until the orcs were completely out of the area. Then she took a step forward, snatching the golden card from Valmos' hand. "Hy!" the dwarf shouted. Gaia completely ignored him and read the words on the card. Place the Lily Hall. Time morning 8 on the 10th. Gaia read the words as the bodyguards tensed. What do you think you are doing? Valmos bellowed again. Sorry, Valmos. You should wait for the next auction. Gaia shrugged as Valmos' eyes glistened with anger and disbelief. Are you tired of living, bitch? The two dwarven bodyguards behind Valmos growled. Instead of answering the dwarves, she just closed her eyes as her silver armor faded away and the black Dark Queen armor replaced it. When the transformation finished, the dwarves took a step back. Valmos was terrified. As a weapons dealer, he was aware of everything that had been happening throughout the world. So naturally, he knew everything about the Dark Lord and his better half, the Dark Queen. The dark armor and the red flaming eyes were dead giveaways. The human bodyguard, on the other hand, collapsed to the ground in utter fear. Even in R, many humans were scared shitless of the Dark Lord. Especially those who migrated to R from Azair. The Dark Lord wants this, said Gaia in her demonic voice. She released her suppressed aura of a half-immortal. As soon as they felt the overwhelming power, they trembled before her. Valmos was speechless. He may not have been as afraid as the human bodyguard of his, but her half-immortal power left him no choice other than to hand over the invitation he had worked so hard for. He had to call in all the favors to meet the orcs and get the card to participate in the Hontorum auction. Every fiber in his dwarven body told him to unsheath his battle axe and chop her head off. However, he was not stupid enough to do so. Can I come with you as your +1? Valmos tried to negotiate with the Dark Queen. He couldn't let go of the golden opportunity to participate in the auction. You could, Gaia rubbed her chin as a smile merged on Valmos' face. But the next words that came out of her mouth froze his smile. But you would be dead by then, said Gaia. She was nonchalant. Before they could react, a thick green smoke enveloped them. Immediately, the dwarves and the human bodyguard began to cough. Blood dribbled from every hole in their bodies. Their eyes widened as they turned jade. Soon their bodies began to melt down like wax statues in heat. One less weapons dealer for the world, Gaia snickered. No one would shed a single tear for Valmos. Instead, the world would be a better place without him. From this point onward, there wouldn't be anyone to sell weapons to both sides and kindle wars between kingdoms. After killing them, Gaia put the invitation into her space ring. Azazel, it's done, said Gaia to Azazel through the earpiece. The Hontorum is going to sell their weapons in an auction. I think Noah or one of his underlings will participate and bid for the weapons. You may want to return to the castle and pick a dress for the occasion, my lady, said Azazel. Usually, Gaia hated wasting precious gold coins on expensive dresses like the other noble women. But this auction was something special. If Noah or the Guardians were attending the auction, she needed to be there. For some reason, she doubted she could steal or destroy the weapons built by one of the Great 8 clans. She must attend the auction and see who buys the weapons. Unfortunately, the Dark Lord's castle was short of gold coins. Therefore, Gaia planned to steal the weapons or destroy them from whoever buys them in the auction tomorrow. Meanwhile, inside the demon's grave, Michael was sitting before a campfire with Vidora by his side. The demon's grave darkened as he heard countless creepy noises in the distance. After roaming around the place for 2 days, he had grown used to the sounds. "Get some sleep. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a long day," said Michael. Chapter 809 Armored Salamandipede. After resting at the fire for a few hours with Vidora, Michael resumed his journey through the demon's grave. Instead of buying the map of the demon's grave, Michael wandered aimlessly. Eventually, he came across a meadow once that looked as if it was stripped out from the pages of a storybook. The grass was Eden green and thigh-high to a thrush. There was a volcanic mountain in the distance that had peaks that looked as cruel as a hag's teeth. The mountain looked off in some mysterious way. Yet again, everything in the demon's grave looked eerie, especially when a thin veil of mist was covering them. Compared to the swamps and the dark forest Michael came through, the meadows were a paradise. Except for the white mist covering the meadows, everything else looked peaceful. It wasn't just the sights that pleased the senses, but also the air had a tinge of sweetness to it. The pitch-black sky above the meadow added an extra charm to the place, and the only light source Michael had was the fuming volcanic mountain in the distance. The lava oozing out of the mountain dimly lit the meadows with its hue of orange. Michael walked through the meadows, gently brushing the grass and flowers with his hands. It was a feast for the eyes. The meadow stretched as far as the eye could see, with no monsters in the near vicinity. Vidora flew out from his shoulder and chased what seemed to be fireflies in a dance of life and death. Almost 15 minutes later, Michael noticed a neon blue ribbon of river running through the meadow. The song of the river was very gentle as it went plinking and tinkling over the gravel bed. Michael halted his steps for a moment and bent down to wash his face with the clear river water. He immediately felt refreshed by the cold water. As he was washing his face, a cold breeze brushed past him. The grass waving with the wind, coupled with the river, sounded like music to Michael's ears. Since Sarba had enhanced senses, he could smell the sweetness of cherry blossoms and the soft caramel scent of flowers in the air. It was so soothing that he wanted to lie down against a mossy rock and drift into a deep sleep. The humidity rendered into dewdrops on the grass. For a few minutes the sky drizzled. But the clouds soon passed, leaving the grass and earth to steam gently like druid smoke. Michael thoroughly washed his face, head, and the back of his neck. He even dipped into the river and came back to wash off the mud from his robes. The swamp really did a number on his outfit. Fortunately, the river was shallow enough for him to cross to the other side. His target was the volcanic mountain in the distance. The volcanic mountain held 3 items he needed to forge the dark swords. After getting those items, he planned to venture deeper into the demon's grave to change their financial status. But he doubted either of these tasks would be easy. He had the feeling the peace and quiet he was enjoying might come to an end soon. As he expected, he sensed a half-immortal being nearby. The being was on his way to the mountain. "Did you sense it?" Sarba asked Michael as Vidora flew back to Michael. Michael nodded. Instead of heading straight toward the being, Michael flicked his wrist as several drones materialized above him. All the drones flew in the monster's direction as Michael concentrated on their feeds. To Michael's surprise, he did not see any monster through the drone feeds. The meadows looked peaceful and quiet. "I am not seeing any monster," Michael said to Vidora. "It can't be. I sensed a powerful being." "Something is there, Ghost," said Sarba. He was absolutely certain that he sensed a monster near them. If he had to bet, he would say it was waiting for them 20 meters ahead of them. The howling wind breezed past Michael. He was not in a rush but strolled toward the monster. If he could fly, he might have flown around the monster instead of fighting. However, he decided to fight the monster because he wanted to challenge himself. Plus, slaying a half-immortal monster would give him millions of experience points. After Gaia killed the dwarves, Valmans and his bodyguards, Michael needed only 400,000 experience points to reach the next level. The closer he got to the monster, the shakier the ground felt. Michael halted his steps and looked at the meadows before him. At first look, the meadows looked no different than the rest. But when Michael looked closer, he noticed an unevenness on the ground, as though something was hiding beneath the meadows. Michael raised his hand as a pebble flew straight into his hand. He then threw the pebble at the ground where he suspected the monster resting. Thud. The pebble hit the ground with a thud, yet nothing happened. Michael threw another pebble, hoping to rile up the monster. He had a feeling the monster was waiting to ambush him. Poor bastard didn't have any idea that Michael had already sensed it. When Michael threw the third pebble, he heard a muffled roar. Brown dust storm emerged from the ground as Michael heard something heavily exhaling. Soon, the ground beneath him trembled. Michael took a step back. The monster hiding beneath slowly emerged from the ground, revealing his full body. It was a long reptilian monster that looked like a hybrid of a salamander and a centipede. The monster crawled out of the hole with its hundreds of tiny golden legs, sticking his long tongue out. Silver scales covered his body from top to bottom. The gigantic monster was at least 50 feet in length. It hissed at Michael, staring at him with its tiny blue eyes. Suddenly, the monster dived down, digging into the ground. Michael immediately activated his X-ray eyes to locate the creature in the ground. The monster dug its way out of the place where Michael was a second ago before jumping away. The area suddenly grew darker as Michael cast the death range. Moreover, the cloud of darkness shrouded Michael's body, completing his Dark Lord form. The dark beam shot out of his eyes. To his surprise, the dark beams bounced off the shiny scales covering the monster. The dark beams didn't even put a dent in the monster's body. Someone else would have been shocked and felt discouraged, but Michael felt excited. As a blacksmith, he could do wonders with scales as strong as these. Since gravity restricted him from flying, Michael couldn't use aerial attacks. Hence, he cast the lightning dash to move around the monster. The monster's scales let out a dim jade light as it fired a blob of boiling hot poison toward Michael. He was lucky enough to dash away, but when the poison hit the ground, everything around it for a 1-meter radius turned into nothing but ash. The ground sizzled like hot oil. Meanwhile, the monster kept firing blobs of poison repeatedly. Despite its gigantic size, the monster was extremely agile and quick. If the poison was not enough to burn the meadows, Michael cast the ring of fire and fired waves of dark flames at the monster. The dark flames burnt everything to ashes on their way. Although the dark beams bounced off the monster's scales, the dark flames managed to burn the monster. It roared in pain. But it didn't suffer much damage as Michael wanted it to. Xianxia, Michael cast the spell as black lightning bolts shot out of his fingertips. The air was electrified with his lightning bolts. Vidora heard the crackling lightning bolts and the creature's roar and flew away from Michael and the monster. When a half-immortal and an immortal were fighting, it was not a good idea to be in their way. Saber saw the energy around them going haywire. As a result, dark clouds appeared out of nowhere above them, threatening them with a heavy downpour. Thunderclaps echoed through the demon's grave. The monster kept disappearing into the ground and jumping out to catch Michael off guard. Michael fought the monster with lightning bolts and dark flames. Suddenly, the monster sprayed poisonous liquid from its mouth. The poison immediately enveloped them, hindering Michael's sight. Fortunately, the Dark Lord armor had a mask he bought from the system and fitted with a filtering system he built inside. The mask filtered the poison ion in the air and gave him fresh air. Michael thought he had overcome the poisonous air with his mask. But he didn't expect the monster to light the poisonous cloud with sparks. When the monster opened its mouth, sparks flew out. The poisonous air exploded in the blink of an eye. The explosion sent Michael flying. Although the responsive shield and the cloud of darkness saved him, he wasn't completely unharmed by the explosion. His whole body was cut and bruised as well as had a couple of broken ribs. The explosion would have reduced a fusion stage cultivator if they were caught in one. It was powerful enough to hurt a god. Michael slowly picked himself up as the APD pumped a healing potion into his body. His poor armor was half burned and had countless holes and cuts. Michael wiped off the blood dribbling down his mouth. The monster hissed, crawling toward Michael without waiting for him to retaliate. "Why isn't he moving?" Iag asked, looking at Michael standing still. The monster moved closer and closer to Michael. It opened its mouth wide to bite and swallow his body as a whole. The ground near Michael trembled as the monster moved closer to him. Still, he didn't even budge from where he was standing. The monster was just an arm-reaching distance from him. It raised its body, opening its mouth wide. Iag almost closed her eyes when she saw the monster reach Michael. But to her shock, she heard a loud bang before the monster went flying away. The monster crashed down on the ground. Vidora was stunned. They all turned their gazes back to Michael to see the Doombringer emanating coldness in his hand. Only Kane saw the Doombringer appear in Michael's hand, and him swinging it with enough force to send the giant monster flying. Several scales on the monster's body tumbled down, leaving the monster's soft skin exposed. Chapter 8:10 Almighty Doombringer. After getting the Ancient Ice Core from the Aqua Auction and Blacksmith trait, Michael infused the Ancient Ice Core with the Doombringer. As a result, the Doombringer could summon frost and freeze its target upon hitting. Michael didn't let the monster stand up and attack him again. Instead, he threw the Doombringer, aiming for the monster's head. The Warhammer soared through the air, leaving a cold trail in the air. The coldness emanating from the Doombringer caused the temperature to drop by several degrees. It hit the monster in the head as the scales covering its head cracked but didn't break down. Michael dashed at the monster using the lightning dash. The black lightning bolts crackled around his body. Even from afar, Sarba could sense the electricity in the air. On his way to the monster, Michael raised his hand in the air as the Doombringer flew straight back into his hand. Fighting against gravity with his sheer brute strength, Michael leaped into the air. Vidora was stunned to see how high Michael could jump in the air. Gravity pulled him down, increasing the force of his descent. Upon nearing the monster, Michael clenched the Doombringer's handle as bone-chilling ice covered the Doombringer from top to bottom. Michael brought down the warhammer on the monster's head while it was preparing to fire a poison blob at Michael. The collision produced a thunderous boom. Several scales on the monster's head cracked. They weren't frail by any means, but Michael was strong enough to crack them with his brute force. The monsters in the demon's grave defied all the typical rules of the world outside. Usually, a half-immortal would be no match for an immortal. However, inside the demon's grave, the monsters had traits and attribute to match the cultivation power of a higher being. For instance, the salamandipede was covered with silver scales that protected it from even the most powerful spells and attacks. If anyone else at the immortal stage fought the salamandipede, they would have been devoured by now. Its poison blobs were powerful enough to melt down an immortal to jelly. In other words, the monsters inside the demon's grave didn't need immortal killing weapons to kill half-immortals or immortals. Hence, why even the most powerful cultivators didn't dare to visit the demon's grave. Still, Michael fought the monster head-to-head without going all out. After receiving a blunt force trauma to its head, the monster roared. Emerald green poison splattered out its mouth. Although the monster lacked facial features, it looked very pissed off. The monster swung its long tail and hit Michael in mid-air. Fortunately, Michael clenched his fist at the right time to bring out his black shield. The sheer force of the monster's brute force sent Michael flying. While he was in the air, the monster fired blobs of poison at Michael. These blobs took the shape of arrows and soared through the air to hit Michael. Once again, Michael raised his shield and shrouded himself with a cloud of darkness to protect himself from the poisonous arrows. The arrows splashed across the ground after hitting the black shield. Unfortunately, a drop of poison hit Michael's boots, making a sizzling noise. Michael immediately swung his legs, throwing away the boots before the poison could touch his skin. "You owe me a pair of boots, mister," said Michael after landing on his bare feet on the ground. Michael stared at the monster with the Doombringer and black shield in each hand. He cracked his neck. On the other side, the monster hissed before digging down into the ground. Despite its colossal size, the monster was quick to dig down and hide. Thanks to Michael's X-ray vision, he could see the tunnels down the ground and the monster. The monster was holding to catch Michael off guard, but he was waiting for the right movement to hit the monster with the Doombringer. He raised the Doombringer in the air as cold energy swirled around the battle hammer. Even from afar, Vidora felt the bone-chilling coldness of the Doombringer. This was the first time Vidora had seen Michael use the Doombringer to its full potential. Typically, Michael would finish the battle without using any weapons. But the monster forced him to take out the Doombringer, which showed how powerful the monster was. The ground beneath Michael kept trembling. He waited for the monster as it crawled toward him underground. Michael took a few steps back as the monster raised its head out of the ground. The moment its head came out of the ground, Michael hit its head with the Doombringer once again. This time, he covered the Doombringer's head with a block of ice to add extra damage to the monster. The monster dashed out of the ground and squirmed in pain. Michael immediately followed up his attack with the Ring of Fire. The monster's head was already covered in a layer of frost, and when the dark flames hit the ice, the scales shattered. Finally, Michael figured out the monster's weakness. The sturdy scales were vulnerable to ice plus fire attacks. They could withstand one element but not both. Since the scales were shattered, the monster's head was exposed. But when he was about to fire dark beams, the monster spewed poison from its mouth. It formed a cloud of green mist around the monster. To avoid an explosion like earlier, Michael immediately dashed away from the monster. To Michael's surprise, a strange glow appeared in the monster's head. Soon the scales grew back, covering its exposed head. Michael creased his brows. Having a regeneration ability brought the battle to the next level. It was time for Michael to change his tactics. The cloud of poisonous mist gave Michael an idea. He dashed away and fired a bolt of lightning at the monster. As Michael planned, the lightning bolt lit the highly flammable poison cloud. The sound of the explosion echoed through the air, but the creature's roar overshadowed the explosion. Both Michael and the monster were blasted into opposite directions. Even a 30-meter distance between them didn't prevent Michael from getting blasted away. Luckily he just suffered some trauma that healed up in a few seconds, thanks to the APD. The same could not be said for the monster. Dark smoke enveloped the area around the monster. Michael had to use his thermal vision to locate the monster. As far as he could see, the monster was squirming as green slimy blood oozed out of several places in its body. Furthermore, it lost several of its legs to the explosion. Instead of dashing at the monster headstrong, Michael clenched the Doombringer around its pommel and its neck right beneath the head. His grip tightened as he pointed the head toward the monster. The runes engraved in the head glimmered with icy blue color. Soon, a stream of frost energy shot out of the Doombringer toward the monster. Everything around Michael froze by the frost energy shooting out of the battle hammer. Crystal ice rocks formed around the monster, slowly freezing it from head to toe. The monster squirmed as the crystals forming around it crumbled down. Yet Michael did not stop freezing the monster. He poured more energy into the Doombringer, creating colder frost energy. The frost energy was cold enough to create a rain of snowflakes around Michael. The monster hissed as the frost covered its body with a thick layer of ice. If Gaze could kill one, Michael would have died by now. Squirming and hissing did not help the monster. Therefore it fired poison blobs out of its mouth. Michael slowly moved toward the monster while keeping the frost beam focused on the monster. Coldness ran down Michael's spine. Even he wasn't spared by the coldness as a thin layer of ice formed on his skin. Nonetheless, Michael chose not to conjure the dark flames. Gradually, the frost energy formed a thick shell around the monster, preventing it from digging into the ground or moving its body freely. By the time Michael reached 5 meters distance from the monster, the ice had covered every inch of the monster's body except its eyes. Without wasting a second, Michael cast the Ring of Fire. A powerful wave of dark flames shot out of Michael's body. At that moment, extreme coldness met its opposite. The ice crystal layer on the monster's body shattered along with its silver scales. Green slimy blood splattered across the ground as Michael raised his shield to protect himself from the poisonous blood. With no scales, the monster's pinkish body was exposed to the world. Fear and shock emerged in the monster's tiny eyes. It hissed with fear. When Vidora thought the monster's life was over, the monster pulled its trump card up its sleeves. The monster slowly opened its mouth as Michael felt a powerful force sucking him into its mouth. Michael was left with no time to react. In a blink of an eye, he was in the monster's mouth. However, the monster couldn't close its mouth. Michael held its mouth wide open with the Doombringer on its palate. "We have to help him," said Iag as Vidora flew toward Michael and the monster. The monster frantically shook its head, trying to close its mouth and devour Michael. The light of life was slowly leaving away the monster's eyes. If one had to guess, one would say the monster had pulled a trick to kill both Michael and itself. Every bit of muscle in Michael's body tensed as veins bulged up on his face. As soon as Vidora reached the monster, they were surprised to see Michael smiling. No one in their right mind would smile stuck in a monster's mouth, but he did. Vidora was speechless. Judging by the smile on his face, they could tell he did not need their help. The monster, on the other hand, completely ignored Vidora and frantically shook its head left and right, hoping Michael would let go of the Doombringer in his hand. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 8:11 Mount Hades. Standing inside the monster's mouth, Michael held its mouth open with the Doombringer in his other hand. Slowly, Michael moved the hand that was holding the Doombringer down. The monster almost snapped its mouth close, but Michael was strong enough to keep it open with one hand. He then raised the Doombringer as a bone-chilling frost beam shot straight down the monster's throat. Vidora heard the monster roar in agonizing pain. The monster went crazy. It swings its entire body left and right to throw out Michael. No matter how hard the monster tried to lose Michael and shoot him with a poison blob, it simply couldn't. Unlike the monster's outer body, its inside was soft tissue and flesh. The frost from the Doombringer crystallized the monster from within. If Michael wanted, he could send a stream of dark flames into the monster's throat and burn it from the inside. However, Michael had other plans for the monster. Instead of killing the monster, he froze the monster to the point it stopped struggling. He turned around before hitting the monster's palate with the Doombringer. The pointy end of the Doombringer hooked into the skin. Michael moved the Doombringer slightly forward as the monster crawled forward like a remotely controlled toy. Vidora was utterly speechless. They thought Michael would kill the monster when he had the chance. Instead, he was driving the monster toward the volcanic mountain in the distance. No one would have dared to make such a daring move. But making such uncanny moves was what made Michael the Dark Lord. The monster was already half dead. Its poison glands and organs were frozen. Vidora followed behind the monster while keeping a safe distance from it. Only while following the monster did they notice several others, like the monster Michael was riding from its mouth. Some of the salamandipeds were bigger and stronger than the monster before them. Even if Michael had killed one, he would have faced several on his way to the mountain. As much as Michael liked to hunt these monsters down and earn experience points, he valued his life and everything he had achieved till now more. Until the system reached level 10, where he could construct a body for himself in case he was killed, he had to keep himself safe. The meadows were littered with hundreds of salamandipeds. Coupled with weird gravity that prevented one from flying, even a group of immortals would be slain in the area. The more time they spent in the demon's grave, the more Vidora learned the dangers lurking in the realm. This was why even the seasoned immortals dared not to venture into the demon's grave despite the rare and priceless treasures within. A few weeks ago, Noah prepared himself to venture into the demon's grave, hoping the place would temper him and enhance his battle prowess. However, Andreas outright stopped him without giving Noah a choice. Andreas didn't think Noah was ready for the dangers in the demon's grave. To be honest, Andreas was right. Noah would have lost his life in a few hours if he had chosen to enter the realm. God or no god, one must be at least at the immortal stage to survive the demon's grave. The past Dark Lord made sure of that. Although the demon's grave was one of the past Dark Lord's regrets, only Michael could survive and close the realm. For some reason, the monsters in the demon's grave didn't attack Vidora. Some of the monsters dug into the ground the moment they saw Vidora. Looking at this weird behavior of the monsters, dark lines appeared on Iag's forehead. She turned her gaze toward Cain since he was the smartest among the three of them. "Hey Cain. Did you see how they went inside the ground when they saw us? It's weird, right?" said Iag. After hearing Iag's remarks, Sarba shared his thoughts with Cain. "I also have this strange feeling that we in this place have some kind of connection." They weren't wrong to have these feelings. But the truth was far more than they could even dream of. Almost 4,000 years ago, before the Dark Lord reset the universe, a brutal world-ending war happened between two otherworldly races. The war had two sides. One side had thousands of demons and the other side had only one fighter, the three-headed Hydra, Vidora. "If so, we will get some answers before we leave this place," said Cain. He didn't let Sarba and Iag know what he felt about this place. Unlike him, they were influenced by emotions rather than their brain. Until Ghost figured out what had really happened in this realm, Cain didn't want to come to any conclusions. Eventually, Michael reached the volcanic mountain base. Dark smoke and ash littered the ground as well as the air. The smell of fire nauseated them. As soon as they reached the mountain base, the high temperature caused the ice layer on the monster to crack. After the ice shattered, Michael was afraid of the monster healing back to its full strength. Therefore, Michael cast the Ring of Fire and Ignitia at the same time. Black lightning bolts crackled around Michael's hand before hitting the monster's throat. Following the black lightning bolt, a stream of dark flames rushed into the monster's mouth, burning its flesh to well done. The monster roared and squirmed as Vidora's senses were overwhelmed by the burning flesh. Soon, the monster lost its strength to squirm and collapsed down. Its body shrunk as green slimy blood oozed out of its skin. Ding. Congratulations to the host for killing a half-immortal level 7 monster. The reward is 1 million experience points and 10,000 badass points. Ding. Congratulations to the host for successfully being a badass. The reward is 15,000 badass points. Michael heard the system in his mind. Not even a second passed as Michael felt warmth throughout his body. This was a familiar feeling. He had leveled up. Congratulations to host Michael for leveling up. The current stage is Immortal level 5. Vidora flew around the monster's lifeless body as Michael stepped out of its mouth. Without even looking around the mountain, Michael squatted down the monster's body and ran his fingers through its scales. After the explosion and fire plus ice attack, the monster lost most of its scales. He fired the dark beams out of his eyes, cutting out the few scales on its body. Vidora saw Michael peeling out the scales with a sickening screeching sound. He seemed unbothered by the blood and gore. On the contrary, he was whistling a strange tune and enjoying collecting the scales. It took him almost an hour to collect all the scales. At that moment he sat before a pile of scales. Cain counted 34 scales in total. Each of them was diamond-shaped in the size of a grown man's palm. They wondered what Michael could do with so few scales. But after seeing the sorry state of his current armor, their first guess was new armor. After stripping the scales from the monster's body, Michael raised his hand, firing streams of dark flames from his hands. Without the scales, the monster's body couldn't withstand the dark flames. It slowly burned down to a hot pile of ashes and bones. Michael slightly bowed, paying his respect to the monster. When Michael turned around, he saw Vidora staring at him with bewildered looks on their faces. "You have something in mind?" Michael asked, tilting his head. "We are wondering what kind of connection we have with this place," said Iag. Her words reminded Michael of the green glow in Cain's mouth that resembled the realm tear earlier. Just like Cain, Michael didn't want to say anything before he learned more about the demon's grave. Since the mysterious woman said the demon's grave was one of his mistakes, he had a feeling it might be related to Vidora somehow. But for the time being, Michael decided to stay silent on the matter. "I'd say let's explore the place more before making any assumptions," said Michael. Iag heaved a heavy sigh and nodded. Finally, Michael turned his focus to the giant mountain before him. It looked bigger and mightier and close. Once again, Michael tried to ascend into the air but ultimately failed due to gravity. The required items needed to forge the dark swords are inside the mountain. "It seems like the host has to climb the mountain. I hope you are good at it," the system said. Weirdly, the system sounded amused by his conundrum. The volcanic mountain was none like Michael had ever seen in his life. Its ashen cone would grow hot and, with a great surging and throbbing, pour forth rivers of molten rock from chasms in its sides. Some flowed blazing down great channels. Some winded their way into the stony plain until they cooled and lay like twisted dragon shapes vomited from the tormented earth. The heat emanated from the molten lava was enough to burn a core formation warrior to dust. Vidora lifted their heavy heads as the mountain filled all their sight, looming vast before them. The growling mountain sounded like a hungry beast waiting to devour everything with its molten lava. Its cone-shaped top reached for the sky, shrouded in a huge mass of ash and sparks of fire. Just looking at the mountain hurt Michael's neck. He sighed, thinking of climbing the mountain through the oozing lava and uneven terrain. He was a hitman, not a mountain climber. Although he had training climbing walls and mountains, this fuming chimney of a mountain was not an ordinary one that anyone could climb. At least he had Mark III grappling hook to help him climb. After taking a long deep breath, Michael walked toward the mountain. He grabbed the edges and started to climb up. "Are you sure about this?" Cain asked Michael. "Don't look down. It might help," said Sarba with a worried face. "Relax. I got this," said Michael. While Michael was climbing up, a sense of déjà vu hit him. He felt like he had climbed the mountain before. But he ignored all the doubts and focused on the task at hand. Chapter 8:12 Life with no regrets. Michael grabbed the edges and slowly climbed up the mountain, with Vidora giving him moral support from the air. Some rocks were wet and slippery while some were rough and easy to hold onto. When Michael looked over his shoulder, everything on the ground looked eerily small. If climbing wasn't hard enough, the air was filled with ash that hindered Michael's sight. The higher he climbed the mountain, the stronger the wind breezed past him. It almost knocked him down every step of the way. After climbing for almost 5 hours, Michael's hands went numb. Michael willed the APD to pump him with a healing potion. Another hour passed as Michael climbed quite higher and finally saw a rock formation sticking out of the mountain large enough for him to sit down. "Careful." Suddenly, Michael's hand slipped as he hung on the edge with one hand. Vidora flew closer to Michael. If it weren't for gravity, Vidora would have tried to fly to the top carrying him with their claws. Gravity in the demon's grave defied the usual physical laws. It didn't affect Michael when he was climbing. Instead, it only affected him when he tried to fly. Cain was afraid that if they tried to carry him to the top, gravity would pull them both down to the ground. At that time, all of Michael's hard world would go down the drain. "Arg," Michael growled as he slowly adjusted his grip and climbed higher. Finally, after great effort, Michael reached the platform. He slowly pulled himself up and sat on the edge. Michael breathed heavily. When he raised his head, his heart sank. The top of the mountain looked just as far as when he was at the bottom. There was still a long way to go to reach the top. Sitting on the platform, Michael was able to see most of the demon's grave. While he was riding the monster, he didn't clearly see how many salamandipeds were roaming the meadows. But now he could see them all. Hundreds of them raised their heads and hissed in the distance. As if the salamandipeds weren't enough, he noticed giant bats and a colossal-sized bull in the distance. Even from miles away, the bull looked gigantic. The bull was easily the size of a 6-story building. No monsters dared to get near the bull while it grazed the grass peacefully. "Man, I hope we don't have to fight that monster," said Sarba. He gasped in shock at the sheer size of the bull. "Who knows? We might have to," Michael's words stunned Sarba. "This place tests everything in me. This mountain is just one of the many tests I have to go through," said Michael. He was certain that this place was testing him. Despite the cultivation gap between him and the monsters, he couldn't destroy them easily as he was used to. Not that Michael was weak or nerfed by the demon's grave, but the monsters defied the typical laws of cultivation. Even a fusion stage monster was strong enough to fight a half-immortal because of their attributes. It was as though the demon's grave had tempered them and made them evolve somehow. These monsters showed signs of intelligence. A monster with intelligence was far more dangerous than one with no intelligence at the same cultivation stage. With the right strategy, even a weak monster could defeat a stronger opponent. For a few minutes, Michael just gazed at the realm before him. He collected his thoughts, calming his mind and soul. Eventually, Michael resumed climbing up the mountain with Vidora flying beside him. "Grab here. This rock looks strong." Vidora flew ahead of Michael and found sturdy rocks and edges for Michael to hold onto. They continued climbing the mountain for another hour and then, Vidora noticed something peculiar on the mountain's surface. "Look here." Sabra hovered in the air, pointing at a small rock formation that was sticking out of the mountain with a dot of red paint on it. Soon they found another ledge with a red dot. One by one, Vidora found several rock formations that could be used as more than just holds. Before Vidora could inform Michael about their find, he fired his grappling hook onto the hold with a red dot. Surprisingly, the grappling hook coiled around the rock and let Michael pull himself higher. Since the place seemed not to have been affected by the past Dark Lord's time resetting array, Michael had a feeling his past self might have left something to help him on his way. Besides, he felt like he had climbed the mountain before. It was definitely his past self who climbed this mount and left these hook points. Did my past self really predict I would climb this mountain again? Michael questioned himself. With the hook points on the mountain's surface, Michael was able to climb faster and faster. But he didn't blindly trust the rock formations as they might have loosened with time. Therefore, Michael studied the hook points with his eyes before firing the grappling hook. Luckily, none of the hook points betrayed him, resulting in a very painful fall. Yet even with the grappling hook, climbing the mountain took Michael hours. By the time he reached halfway to the top, the place had darkened. With not enough light, Michael didn't dare to continue climbing. Coupled with volcanic ash in the air, Michael could barely see Vidora, let alone the hook points. So he decided to find a platform to rest until the light returned to the place. Right before the last light disappeared, Michael found a platform just big enough for him to sit on. His legs were hanging down along with one hand. The rock barely had enough space for him. But he was not in the position to be picky. Instead of trying to rest upon Michael's shoulder, Vidora chose to hover in the air. The last thing Vidora wanted was for the rock platform to break down when they sat on Michael. "Do you think someone else had climbed the mountain before us?" asked Sarba. "What kind of stupid question is this? Of course someone had climbed this before us. I don't know if someone had climbed to the top, but someone definitely tried. This place has been here for 5,000 years. That's a lot of years." Ayag rolled her eyes. Michael had to agree with Ayag. Although the demon's grave was treacherous to even immortals, one must be a fool to think the great 8 clans didn't dare to unveil the secrets of this realm. But he wasn't sure how farther they ventured. What must have happened here? "The woman said this place was one of my past self's mistakes." Michael slowly spoke, looking at the realm around him. Through the volcanic ash, he saw silhouettes of mountain chains, the bull in the distance, and even a flat land that resembled a lake. He could only imagine the terrors lurking in these places. Suddenly the mountain trembled. Michael almost bolted to his feet. But the tremor soon stopped. It felt like the volcano inside the mountain was raging to erupt. Gradually, the tremor died down as the mountain returned to its peaceful state. "People are gonna freak out when they hear we entered the demon's grave and survived," said Sarba. "Imagine what the Guardians would think. They are going to spin some story and make us the village of it." Ayag rolled her eyes. Vidora used to not care about what was happening in the world after they heard their kind was wiped out from the universe. However, they slowly realized Ghost, Gaia, and Nightmare were their family despite everything. After feeling the familial bond with them, Vidora felt they were part of Ghost's life. They cared about the order and hated everyone who stood against them. Besides, they were intelligent enough to see who the real enemy of the world is. "Well, no matter what you do, there will always be someone to point their fingers and criticize you," said Michael. He leaned back on the mountain and gave Vidora a piece of advice about life. "Thing is, you cannot satisfy everyone. If you live your life thinking about what others might think, you won't even satisfy yourself. Never look back and regret. Look back and smile at what you have done. Live like that," said Michael with a heavy heart. If what the mysterious woman said was true, his past self had little too many regrets in his life. Even when he saw his past self talk to him in an ethereal form, Michael noticed a strong sense of regret and grief in his eyes. The past Dark Lord might have fooled the world but not Michael. After all, his past self was him. Michael wanted Vidora to have no regrets in their lives. Why are you suddenly being so gloomy? Asked Sarba as Michael smiled, hiding his emotions well. This place is one of my regrets, Vidora. It's not? Sarba shook his head. The Dark Lord who lived 5,000 years ago is not you, said Sarba. He's literally the same person who used time array to travel through time, said Iag. There is no point in dwelling in the past. Whatever mistake my past self made, I have to own it and rectify it. Kane nodded, agreeing with Michael. Then he spoke what was in his mind. Your past self didn't seem like the one to make mistakes. He might have wanted this place to exist for you perhaps. Kane's words made sense to Michael as they always did. Even if his past self made a mistake, he could have fixed it with the system. But since he chose not to, Michael knew there might be a reason behind his reasoning. For the time being, Michael had to climb the mountain and get his hands on the 3 items needed to forge the pair of dark swords. Without the swords, his battle potential was being suppressed. I think this place is strong enough. Get some sleep while you can. We will reach the top tomorrow. You need to rest, Michael said to Vidora. Soon Vidora flew to Michael, landing on his lap. They slowly curled up into a ball and closed their eyes. Meanwhile, Michael couldn't close his eyes. This place had an unknown effect on him. His mind kept replaying the mysterious woman's words. Chapter 8:13 Birth of the Dark Swords. The morning in the demon's grave was gloomy as ever. A tinge of light lit the horizon that looked like a red canvas. With newly found vigor, the monsters roared. Molten lava flowed out from the top, lighting the mountain with its golden light. Coupled with the morning light, the realm looked brighter than earlier. In the distance, the bats littered the red sky. Strangely, more and more bats appeared on the horizon for some reason. On the other hand, Michael and Vidora resumed their journey toward the top. The higher Michael climbed, the fewer hook points he came across. He hoped to reach the top using only the grappling hook. But on the contrary, he had to use his hands to climb more than the grappling hook. Without looking down, Michael climbed up the mountain. His entire body was drenched in sweat. Careful, Sarba warned Michael. Despite the dry air and the heat, the mountain surface looked slimy for some reason. Grabbing the holds turned out to be a pain because of the slimy surface. Still, Michael carefully held onto the edges and moved up on the mountain. He didn't rush climbing up. Instead, he took every step with caution. Several hours passed in a blink of an eye. He had to use healing potions to keep his hands and legs from going numb. Almost 10 hours later, the top of the mountain became close to Michael. With a final use of his grappling hook, Michael climbed up to the top. After lifting his body to the top, Michael just collapsed to the ground and breathed heavily. Michael's chest rose and fell at regular intervals. Meanwhile, Vidora flew away from Michael and saw a giant hole filled with molten lava. The mountain was like a giant well, except it had lava instead of water. Just looking down into the hole made Sarba's head spin. They quickly flew back to Michael and landed on his chest. Just as they were about to ask Michael to stand up, the mountain rumbled. Soon, the lava erupted for a moment, throwing a splash of lava outside. Michael immediately kicked up to his feet. Molten lava glistened on the ground like a gooey orange cake. Iag was tempted to have a taste, but she was not that stupid. Michael slowly walked to the edge and looked down at the boiling lava down. He felt like he was staring at the sun itself. The molten lava inside the mountain was too bright and hot enough to melt down a fusion stage warrior like a wax statue. The volcano remained dormant, hiding the terror and destruction within. Once it erupts, he could imagine how much damage it would do. Fortunately, the demon's grave was void of population. "Hey, look, your robes!" Sarba's shout broke Michael's concentration. He quickly turned around and saw his long coat was on fire due to the extreme heat in the air. Crimson-red flames engulfed his long coat as Michael immediately took it off and threw it on the floor. In a blink of an eye, the flames reduced his once stylish black long coat to nothing but ash. The long coat had been with him since his first day in this world. Vidora saw Michael squat before the pile of ash and grab a handful. "Rest in peace, old friend," said Michael. Even though it was just a lifeless piece of clothing, Michael shared a connection with it. After all, he bought it from the system when he first came to this world. At that moment he felt like a piece of him had left him. But he could only sigh and buy another one from the system store. For now he chose not to, as the heat would only burn it down again. At least his trousers escaped the heat, but Michael was prepared to lose them too. Once again Michael walked to the edge to look around the mountain. According to the system, the required items to forge his dark swords were somewhere inside the mountain. Dark volcanic ash hindered Michael's eyesight. To remedy the situation, Michael simply raised his hand as a powerful gust of wind cleared the area around him of the ash. As a result, he was able to see the mountain beneath him more clearly. Finally, Michael saw the narrow pathways around the crater. These pathways were just wide enough for one man to walk. But any misstep would lead straight into the boiling volcano. Instead of dropping down the pathways, Michael flicked his wrist as a drone materialized above him. However, the drone shattered into pieces due to the intense heat. Michael hoped it wouldn't happen, but it did. The only option Michael had was personally walking the narrow pathway. Seeing no point in lingering around, Michael slowly climbed down toward the pathway. He pushed his body against the wall and slowly walked down. Step by step, Michael walked the narrow path. "If I trip down, grab me by my collar and give me a second to use the grappling hook," Michael said to Vidora. Obviously, Vidora couldn't fly away carrying Michael because then gravity would pull both of them down. But if Vidora grabbed him by his collar, it would give him a second to react and use either the teleportation scroll or the grappling hook to escape the well of molten lava beneath him. "System, can you pinpoint the location?" Michael asked the system. "How about the host paying the system 100,000 badass points to show you the entrance?" "Do it." Michael immediately agreed to the deal. Normally, Michael would have preferred finding the entrance by himself, but the situation dictated otherwise. Any misstep would be life-threatening. So he was not in the situation to bitch with the system. After the system took the agreed amount, a glow appeared in the corner of Michael's sight. A part of the walls on the other side was glowing. "Try not to fall down, host," said the system. Michael sensed a bit of sick humor in its voice. If the crater containing the lava was a circle, Michael had to go to the opposite end to reach the glow. The narrow path was already crumbling down bits and pieces at a time. But Michael surprised the system by climbing back to the top. Vidora frowned as they had no idea why Michael suddenly climbed back to the top. "What happened? You got cold feet?" Ayag tilted her head. "What are you up to, host?" The system also seemed surprised and questioned Michael. "Using my brain, that's all," Michael thought. Then he started to walk around the crater to reach the glow instead of the narrow path. The mountain's top was broader and more stable compared to the narrow path. So why did Michael have to risk himself walking the narrow path when he had a much better alternative? Except for the strong wind that tried to push him down, the current path had no downsides at all. Vidora followed behind Michael, having no idea what had just happened. "Where are you going?" asked Sarba. "Well, see," Michael mumbled as he continued on his path. Eventually he reached directly above the glow. He took a deep breath before climbing down the mountain. In a few seconds, Michael landed on the narrow path. The glow on the mountain surface slowly faded away. But to the naked eye, the mountain's surface had no strange symbols or runes. Instead, it looked brownish with the volcano ash covering its surface. Michael ran his fingers through the surface, trying to see if there was something engraved in it. Yet he found nothing. "It must be somewhere here," Michael said to himself. Then he activated his X-ray vision. As soon as his eyes turned blue, he saw a dark square on the surface. Michael placed his palm on the dark square. Suddenly, a bolt of electricity ran down his spine through his hand. Sarba sensed the sudden spike in energy around them. Before he could question Michael, the mountain surface trembled. To Vidora's surprise, the mountain's surface slowly creaked open like a secret door, revealing a dark corridor leading up somewhere. Michael took a deep breath before walking into the dark corridor with Vidora following him behind. After they took several steps into the corridor, the door closed behind them. Everything turned pitch black. "Do you smell that?" asked Sarba, sniffing the air. "What?" "The air, it smells like oil," said Sarba. He is right, Michael agreed with Sarba. In addition to oil, he could also smell a tinge of metal smell in the air. To light their path ahead, Michael conjured a ball of crimson-red flames. The flames dimly lit the dark place as Michael walked through the corridor. For a while, nothing came across his path. Even Vidora didn't utter a word. Hence, silence took over them. Seconds slowly turned minutes, and each minute felt like an eternity. As much as Michael loved peace and quiet, he wanted something to happen. Otherwise, he was afraid of being bored to death. As though the universe had listened to his plea, the corridor opened up to a spacious hall. Michael halted his steps in utter shock. A brightly lit hall with various iron tools and tables welcomed him. The light was coming from the lava oozing down the walls into the giant braziers. Everywhere Michael turned, he saw iron hammers, tools, and a giant anvil in the center. On the hall's corner was a furnace big enough to be called a room. In addition, there was also a complex system of pipes running across the ceiling, and a few metal tubes connected to the system hung down, swaying in the hot air. "A forge," Michael mumbled under his breath. If the host is willing to buy the special dark ore and hilt, you can start forging the pair of dark swords in this very forge. The system sounded in his head. Hearing its words, the blacksmith living in Michael became excited. To be honest, he thought he would find a few special items. But he was completely caught off guard by the forge before him. The previous Dark Lord forged his swords in this very forge. And now, Michael was about to forge something better. Chapter 8:14 Birth of the Dark Swords 2 Michael stepped into the forge as the hall brightened. The forge welcomed its master by providing more light and heat to the hall. Without a doubt, the place looked ancient. Everything in the forge was covered in thick ash, and some of the little tools were rusted to the point there was no chance of restoring them. Michael looked for something that might give him a clue or two about the forge's origins. While looking around the room, a large anvil drew his attention to the center of the forge. As a 5-star blacksmith, he could tell a gorgeous anvil when he saw one. He ran his fingers through the anvil, wiping off the dust on its surface. Excitement coursed through his veins as he saw the vise, a beautifully crafted piece of contraption used to hold objects securely while they were worked on. It was made of a darkish metal and seemed it could hold large and heavy objects as its jaws had a grip that could exert considerable pressure. This forge was a blacksmith's dream come true. Finally, Michael turned his gaze toward the heart of any forge, the furnace. Whoever built the forge chose to build the furnace in the wall and let the smoke go straight to the mountain's top. No one would be able to tell the difference between volcanic fumes and the smoke coming from the forge. Although the forge had many intricate gears and small contraptions inside to make it more efficient, Michael could only see the rectangle hole into which the metal ores or the iron works should be put. On the side, Michael saw a lever and a rotating button built into the wall. "Pull the lever and see what happens," said Iag. Her eyes glistened with curiosity just like Sarba. Michael already had a pretty good guess of what it would do. But he pulled the lever to confirm his assumption. The lever was considerably harder to pull. It took a bit of force to pull down. A normal person had no chance of pulling down the lever since even Michael had to use his strength. After he pulled down the lever, nothing happened for a while. Then the forge trembled slightly. The temperature in the air rose by several degrees. A gust of wind shot out of the furnace, pushing out the ash. The furnace suddenly lit up as gooey lava oozed into it from above. It was like hot chocolate except hotter and brighter like liquid gold. Michael immediately felt the intense heat from the lava. On the other hand, the rotating button had an arrow pointing up. He rotated the button anti-clockwise, expecting it would somehow reduce the heat. An oven, that was what this furnace reminded him of. After rotating the button, a strong gust of wind mixed with cold air sprayed onto the lava. Gradually the lava lost its heat and became bearable. "I wonder where that cold air is coming from," Kane frowned. Michael had the same question until he used his thermal vision and found the source of the cold air. His X-ray vision vaguely showed something familiar to Michael, an ancient ice core. "Makes sense," Michael mumbled under his breath. "What is?" asked Sarba. "You asked how the cold air is produced. It's coming from the ancient ice core built within the furnace," said Michael. Congratulations to the host for finding 3 out of 5 requirements to forge the dark swords. The system's notification inside a golden tab blocked his vision. He was confused for a moment, but after looking around the forge, he realized the meaning of the system's words. So the 3 requirements were anvil, vise, and this furnace? Michael asked the system. The system didn't answer. But its silence spoke volumes. Now that he had a forge, he only needed the ore and the hilt to forge the dark swords. The dark ore and the hilt will cost the host 1 million badass points. The host is 400,000 badass points short of 1 million. The system suggests the host get a loan for 600,000 badass points. Michael sighed inside after hearing the system's words. Most of his badass points went back to the system when he bought the blueprint for the torpedo and dark swords. Luckily, his journey into the demon's grave awarded him enough badass points to reach 600,000 badass points. Still, he needed 400,000 to buy the ore and hilt for the dark swords. "How much do I have to pay you back after the loan?" asked Michael. 700,000 badass points. As much as Michael hated loans, he had to take one from the system. Having a pair of swords that could withstand the dark flames would give him an overwhelming advantage in any battle. His excitement overshadowed his hesitation about taking a loan. "I agree," said Michael as the system immediately gave him an additional 600,000 badass points. For a moment he had 1,300,000 badass points. This amount was short-lived as the system took 1 million points for the ore and the hilt. A second later, 2 bars of dark metal materialized on the table before Michael. "The hilt will be given to the host at the last steps of forging the dark swords," said the system. Vidora was surprised by the sudden appearance of dark metal bars. They quickly landed beside the metal bars and studied the two bars. These bars were as dark as midnight. They were smooth and heavier than they looked. Vidora couldn't even move the bars an inch. "This is heavy," Iag growled, trying to move the bar with her head. Michael grabbed one bar and lifted it up. "You are right," Michael agreed with Iag. The metal bar was damn heavy as it made his biceps bulge up. Although the metal bar was the size of a standard smartphone, it weighed at least 200 kilograms. Michael couldn't help wondering how heavy his swords would be. He hoped they wouldn't be as heavy as the metal bars. With the metal bar in his hand, Michael looked around. He noticed a cauldron near the furnace. Vidora flew to the cauldron and carried it to Michael in their claws. "Let's begin." Michael removed his black arm cut and threw it to the side. It restricted his movements. Then Michael placed the two metal bars into the cauldron. After he placed the two metal bars into the cauldron, it became too heavy for Vidora to carry. Hence, Michael carried the cauldron to the furnace and hung it above the hot lava. When he hung the cauldron, he noticed a pipe hanging directly above the cauldron. He followed the pipe to the table in the center. Strange enough, there was another pipe hanging with its end open. "Hey Ghost, look. There's a symbol engraved in here." Sarba raised his voice, hovering beside the dark metal pipe. Michael came to take a closer look at the pipe. As Sarba said, there was a tiny symbol engraved in the pipe. He could make out a shape like D in flames. Dark flames? Michael questioned himself as he conjured the dark flames. The temperature in the forge rose by several degrees as soon as the dark flames appeared. Michael pushed the dark flames into the metal pipe. To his surprise, the metal pipe hanging above the cauldron released a purple flame into the cauldron. Somehow, the ancient ice core tempered the dark flames and released purplish flames on the other end. This purple flame wasn't as hot and violent as the dark flames, but it still had the characteristics of the dark flames. The purple flames heated the cauldron in a blink of an eye. Soon the cauldron turned dim orange on the edges. But when Michael stopped sending dark flames into the pipe, the purple flames stopped at the other end. Michael didn't think he would need to send dark flames to melt all the metals. The hot lava was hot enough to achieve that feat. However, the dark metal required dark flames. Having no other option, Michael sent a stream of dark flames into the metal pipes. Several runes in the metal pipe lit up, protecting them from melting down under the dark flames' intense heat. Several hours passed by in a blink of an eye. When Vidora flew closer to the cauldron, they saw the dark metal bars finally melting down. Surprisingly, tiny crimson-red lightning bolts crackled around the cauldron. They formed from gooey dark metal. Everything around the cauldron darkened as the forge trembled. Michael ignored the tremor and continued to send dark flames into the pipe. As a blacksmith, he knew when to stop sending the dark flames and let the metal cool off for a while. The forging of dark swords was very different from typical sword forging. Almost an hour later, Michael moved away from the metal pipe. Then he searched for a metal block and found one buried deep under all the rusted tools and metal works. He carried the block of metal on his shoulder and put it on the table with a loud thud. Due to the forge's heat, Michael was sweating bullets. But he enjoyed himself working as a blacksmith. The metal block was a long rectangle with 3 meters long and a meter wide. In addition, it was at least 10 inches thick. Under Vidora's curious gaze, Michael fired dark beams out of his eyes and created a sword-shaped hollow in the metal block. The shape was neither too long nor too short. After the metal bars melted, he would have to pour the liquid metal into the shape and harden the metal. Since he was about to forge 2 swords, Michael found another metal block and repeated the process, except the second sword was just a few inches longer than the first. As Michael was preparing everything to forge his new swords, the braziers around him flickered. Michael put down the tongs and looked around the place. For some reason, the flames above the braziers dimmed out. Then Michael felt everything go dead silent. To Michael's surprise, a holographic image of himself appeared right above the table he was working on. "Welcome to our forge," said the Dark Lord. Chapter 8:15. Birth of the Dark Swords 3. The sudden appearance of the past Dark Lord surprised Michael. But deep down he expected the Dark Lord to leave a holographic recording of himself. The moment Michael stepped into the forge, he felt like he owned this place. For a few seconds the Dark Lord's image flickered in the air. The device he left had been lying dormant for thousands of years. It was a miracle the device was still in working condition. "I knew you would find the forge. Listen carefully. By the time of this recording, I don't know how long this message will last or when you will reach the place," said the Dark Lord. He talked to Michael with his hands behind his back. Unlike earlier, the Dark Lord looked relieved and even had a smile on his face. "I have made some mistakes. That's what makes me human. But soon, everything would go back to normal. I hope you have found some of the armor pieces I left behind. Find them all and forge yourself a new one. Trust me, you will need it soon. I know you will feel frustrated by all the cryptic messages. To be honest, I do too. But this time array and time travel are not as simple as we think. Even now, I can't tell you my whole story as much as I want to. Our friend strictly ordered me not to. The Dark Lord emphasized the words our friend. Michael had a feeling he was talking about the system. Since the system itself ordered him not to reveal his story, Michael couldn't blame the past Dark Lord. The Dark Lord smiled. Michael was pleased to see his past self smile. This forge is my gift to you along with my hammer. You need it to forge powerful weapons and armor. If my guess is right, you might be in a financial mess and that's why you are here in the first place. When this recording is over, you will receive something that will open up a portal directly to this forge. But you must build a powerful portal in your castle first if you hadn't already. The Dark Lord paused for a moment and looked around as though he was searching for something. Meanwhile, Michael was delighted to hear he could travel to the demon's grave and to the forge from his castle. It seemed like his past self was more powerful and resourceful than he initially thought, which made Michael wonder more about what the hell happened that pushed him to reset the entire universe. He had a feeling it was connected to Gaia but didn't know the whole story behind the past Dark Lord's reasoning. Where the hell did it go? The past Dark Lord searched for something frantically. A few seconds later he turned his focus back to Michael. The monsters you fought on your way here, they were modified by an asshole to fight me. Of course I could kill them with a snap, but I don't think it would be true for you. So tread carefully. And keep Vidora out of trouble. I really missed the time when they were tiny and cute. The grown-up Vidora. The past Dark Lord sighed and let out an exhausted smile. Vidora frowned as Iag almost hissed at the Dark Lord. After your trip to the demon's grave, I hope they still call the place that. Your life will get a whole lot tougher. But hey, race, a piece of advice from yourself to you, not everything is black and white. Also, don't always go for the kill. Some of our enemies are far more valuable alive than dead. As he said, the Dark Lord turned around and walked to his work table. Due to some reason, Michael couldn't clearly see the table or what he was working on. The time had corroded the recording and made it impossible to see anything other than the Dark Lord. This array will fix everything, Michael heard the Dark Lord mumble. Then he turned around once again. What else I thought about telling you? The Dark Lord rubbed his chin for a moment. Ah yes. The Dark Lord snapped his finger, showing his sudden realization. Finish your castle as soon as you can and spare no expense. You have no idea how many tried to penetrate mine and lost their lives. Sooner or later, you will get tired of all the killings. The Dark Lord paused as his expression grew darker. Don't get tired. Because you are just starting your life as the Dark Lord. Always provide a reason for the people to fear you, my lord. Suddenly Michael heard another voice. It sounded wise and elderly, but he had heard this voice before. Aladir? Michael frowned. You sounded old, very old. Are you recording another message for yourself again? Aladir asked the Dark Lord like a strict father. Unfortunately, Michael couldn't see Aladir in the recording. Hey, is that Aladir I am hearing? Iag asked Kane and Sarba in a husky voice. I think so, Sarba nodded. You cannot leave these messages everywhere, my lord. It will create unwanted branches in the timeline. You already took a big risk by breaking down your armor and leaving them behind. Who knows what catastrophe it's going to bring? Aladir yelled at the Dark Lord. Look on the bright side, Aladir. We won't be here to see it, the Dark Lord shrugged. Come on. Finish what you are doing. We have a lot to do in a short time, said Aladir. You became grumpier with age. Relax and give me some time alone with myself. The Dark Lord looked over his shoulder and winked at Michael. The Dark Lord waited until Aladir left the room. Huff, the Dark Lord sighed. I am going to miss many things, but grumpy Aladir is not one of them. Try to find a way to stop him from getting older because you do not want him to. Trust me, the Dark Lord chuckled. Who am I kidding? I'm going to miss that old elf. It feels good to have someone look you in the eyes and lecture you, said the Dark Lord. At the peak of his life, no one dared even look at him, let alone lecture him. Almost the entire world trembled at the mere mention of his name. Only a few people existed in his timeline who had the guts to speak their minds before him. Aladir was one of them. Just by looking into the Dark Lord's eyes, Michael could tell how much he would miss his world. The Dark Lord sacrificed everything so Michael could fix his mistakes and live the life he deserved. Soon the hologram began to flicker. Despite his advice, I will still leave some recordings for you. Take care of everyone and everything. Who knows, we might even meet at some point. After all, time is a mysterious thing and life is full of surprises. After these words escaped the Dark Lord's mouth, he vanished into thin air. As soon as he disappeared, the table before Michael trembled. A copper ring big enough to fit in his hand materialized on the table. With another tremor, a silver hammer with many intricate runes engraved in it appeared. At first, Michael gently grabbed it and studied the ring. "Is that a portal?" asked Diag as Michael nodded. "With this, we can get in and out of the demon's grave as we please," said Michael with a grin. Countless ideas popped into his mind and made him excited for the journey ahead. However, his excitement was doused by the Dark Lord himself when he appeared again above the table once again in the holographic form. "And forgot to tell you, the monsters in this realm aren't your typical XP farm. Every death makes someone I can't name strong. Don't make your enemy stronger," the Dark Lord warned Michael. Judging by the serious tone of his voice, Michael let go of the idea of farming experience points by killing the monsters here. What did he mean by XP farm? Sarba asked his siblings, but they seemed confused as a child lost in a parade. After warning Michael, the Dark Lord's figure completely vanished into thin air. The Dark Lord left Michael with more questions than answers. For instance, Michael wanted to know who created these monsters in the demon's grave, as well as how he would grow stronger with the death of each monster. The more time Michael spent in the realm, the more he realized there was more to this place than meets the eye. Finally, Michael took a deep breath and decided to clean the mess in the forge. Returning to the metal pipe, Michael sent a stream of dark flames and continued to melt the dark metal bars. Although he was focused on forging the swords and cleaning the forge, he couldn't help wondering about everything he had heard from the past Dark Lord. Michael lost track of time working the forge. While Vidora was asleep on the table, he continued to melt down the metal bars. After 2 days to be exact, Michael saw the metal bars completely melt and take a liquid form. He covered his palms with dark flames and lifted up the cauldron with dark metal liquid inside. Sweat beads formed on his forehead as he slowly carried the cauldron to the table. When he reached the table, he slowly poured out the black liquid into the metal block with the sword-shaped hollow. The black liquid ran through the hollow, slowly taking the shape of a sword. After filling both metal blocks, Michael placed the cauldron on the floor. A typical blacksmith would wait for the liquid to harden, but Michael was anything but typical. Hence, he took out his Doombringer and summoned Frost to cool down the black liquid. The black liquid sizzled as tiny red lightning bolts cracked around the metal block. Somehow, the dark metal created these tiny lightning bolts. These lightning bolts crackled around the black liquid like tiny guardians. Michael focused the frost beam toward the black liquid, tempering the metal. Even with the frost beam, the black liquid took hours before slowly starting to harden. He then grabbed the hammer, preparing to douse the dark swords into hot lava and shape it up. Chapter 8:16. The dark sword. Several hours passed in a blink of an eye. At that moment, the forge was filled with the sound of a hammer hitting the metal. Michael was alone in the forge, peacefully forging his dark swords. Vidora was asleep after helping Michael clean up the forge. After Michael spent hours sweeping the floor, cleaning up the walls, and destroying all the rusted metal works, the forge looked pristine. Almost all the tools needed to forge powerful weapons and armor were readily available in the forge except for ores and some other materials. Standing before the anvil, Michael raised his hammer and brought it down on the black sword. His muscles twitched and bulged up as he kept hitting the sword with the hammer. Michael was drenched in sweat as he looked like he had just bathed. Even after the dark metal cooled down, it radiated a strange heat that was powerful enough to melt a man's skin. Usually, a heated sword would be submerged in oil or water in some situations. On the contrary, Michael had molten lava in one metal barrel and bone-chilling ice created by the ancient ice core in another. The dark sword was slowly taking the shape Michael wanted it to. Its surface was crimson red after being hit by the hammer repeatedly. Finally, Michael raised the sword and submerged it in the lava. The sword remained submerged in lava for a while until Michael couldn't hold it by the end. His palms were bloody red due to the heat. When he took out the dark sword, hot lava oozed out from its surface. Michael immediately submerged the sword again in the frost beside the lava. The ice sizzled, turning into vapor because of the intense heat. As soon as he put the sword in the ice, countless tiny crimson-red lightning bolts crackled around the dark sword. "Few more hours to go," Michael mumbled under his breath before taking out the second sword and repeating the same process. As though nature itself had sensed the birth of dark swords, the sky above the mountain darkened. Unknown to Michael, a lightning storm was raging outside. As a result, the monsters outside were terrified to the core. The demon's grave had never seen heavy rain or a storm in thousands of years. But at that moment, the storm raged outside, along with hundreds of lightning bolts striking the realm from above. Michael paid no attention to the weather outside. Iag slowly opened her eyes to the sound of rumbling thunder. The mountain trembled as thunderclaps echoed through the realm. Her vision was slightly blurred after the long nap. She shook her head, clearing her sight. Sarba and Cain woke up after her and saw Michael's back. To their surprise, they felt a strange, powerful energy in the forge. Moreover, they couldn't help hearing a strange buzzing noise. "Hey, you finished the swords?" asked Iag. Michael slowly turned around with his new swords in his hand. Just the simple look of the dark sword stunned them speechless. The blade was as dark as midnight, with tiny crimson-red lightning bolts dancing around from the tip to the hilt. Light coming from the braziers was reflected on the blade's surface. In the faint light, Vidora noticed the complex engravings and runes, but they were almost unnoticeable to the naked eye. Any oblivious man could tell how exceptional the swords were. Michael gave the blade a matte black finish and designed the hilt like a dragon coiling around the sword. Unlike any other swords in the world, the dark swords were exceptionally heavy. Each sword weighed at least 50 kilograms and required immense raw power to swing around. But despite their weight, the swords were perfectly balanced. The swords were black from top to bottom except for the hilt, where the dragons had a tinge of redness, and their eyes glimmered icy blue due to the use of an ancient ice core. If the swords were not dashing enough, the lightning bolts crackling around the blade added an extra layer of beauty to them. "Let us see how sharp they are," Iag asked curiously as Michael turned his gaze to the barrel with hot lava inside. He swung the dark sword across the barrel. When he swung the sword, the crackling noise sounded louder. Then nothing happened for a second. Iag frowned, but soon half of the metal barrel slid down from its lower half. Michael felt no resistance from the metal barrel. To be honest, he didn't even feel cutting the metal barrel. The dark sword went through the metal barrel like a hot knife through very soft butter. Wow, even Cain was surprised by the dark swords. "Just need to put a summoning rune on them when we return home," said Michael, swinging the swords in the air. Michael finally put the dark swords into the sheaths on his back. They formed an X on his back. This way he could unsheath them faster than from the sheaths hanging on his waists. Plus it would look cooler. With his dark swords finished, he could finally venture deep into the realm. He threw a final look at the forge and prepared to leave the place. "What do you say we take these babies for a trial run?" asked Michael as Vidroa bobbed their heads up and down enthusiastically. Michael exited the forge through the corridor he came in the first place. Eventually he reached the mountaintop and stood on the edge, looking at the realm before him. The sky was alive as heavy rain crashed furiously to the ground. Ancient trees in the distance toppled, lightning shattered the sky, and thunder shook the ground. Rain began to pour furiously, and monstrous tornadoes littered the realm. This storm was the worst Michael had ever seen. Rain fell like bullets, destroying anything and everything in its path. Out of nowhere, a loud thunderclap resonated in the sky. Michael stood there on edge, a step away from falling down. Due to the intense heat coming from the boiling lava, the droplets were vaporized before they could even reach the lava. Still, the vapor created a thick white mist around Mount Hades. "Look," Iag pointed at the horizon as Michael saw a giant bat flying in his direction. As though the dark swords had sensed the threat, they produced more lightning bolts. These bolts crackled around the sheath as well as Michael. Cracking his neck, Michael took a step forward, dropping down from the mountain. Gravity pulled him down with enough force to create a large crater in the ground when he landed. If someone else fell from the mountain, their bones would have shattered to pieces, and their body would have turned into bloody mush. But Michael comfortably landed on his feet. He slowly walked forward as the bat flew closer and closer to Michael. The bat was at a half-immortal stage, several times stronger than the bat he fought outside the demon's grave. Michael unsheathed his dark swords and waited for the bat to attack him. The bat was big enough to cast a large shadow on the ground. When it flew closer to him, Michael heard a strange noise coming from its mouth. He stood still as the bat dived down to rip him apart with its claws. Finally, the bat was just a few meters away from Michael's head. In a blink of an eye, Michael threw the dark sword at the bat. The sword soared through the air like a bullet and went straight through the bat's chest. Blood splattered on the ground as the bat had a hole in its chest. The sword went clean through its chest and came outside. The bat roared in pain before crashing down to the ground. Screaming in pain, the bat flapped its wings frantically. But no matter how hard it tried to fly away, the bat simply couldn't. The dark sword penetrated its very heart. Vidora snickered at the bat as the bat roared with its eyes burning with pain and rage. Then Vidora flew away to pick up the dark sword Michael threw. While Michael made his way to the bat with the second dark sword in his hand, the bat crawled backward in fear. Tsk. Michael showed his disapproval of the bat's actions by shaking his head. The bat could have avoided death if it chose to fly the other way. Although the past Dark Lord warned him about killing the monsters recklessly, he would not let go of those who attacked him alive. Since the bat tried to kill him, it was only fair that he return the favor. By the time Michael was just an arm-reaching distance from the bat, Vidora had returned to him carrying his other sword in its legs. The bat groaned as Michael pressed its claws under his feet. When Michael clenched the swords tighter, the engravings on the blade lit up. He just swung the dark swords as the bat's head flew off of its shoulder. Ding! Congratulations to the host for killing a half-immortal stage level 4 monster. The reward is 1 million experience points and 25,000 badass points. Michael heard the system in his head. These dark swords were powerful enough to kill any immortals. They didn't need to be infused with an immortal bone like a typical immortal killing weapon. It took Michael only one swing to cut the bat's head clean off. Without its head, the bat's body violently twitched, splashing blood all over the place. Only then did Michael realize how powerful his swords were. He regretted not forging them way earlier. With these swords, his battle prowess shot through the roof. Vidora was stunned to see the dead bat on the ground. The battle literally lasted for a few seconds. Outside the demon's grave, the fusion stage bat gave Michael a headache as Iag had to use her power to disrupt its powers. But now Michael killed the bat in a few seconds. After killing the bat, Michael flicked his sword, removing the blood on the blade. It's a pity. I was thinking of covering the blades with the dark flames, Michael sighed. Not to jinx the situation, but I have a feeling we will come across more monsters on our way, said Sarba. Speaking of which, where are we going next? Asked Iag. To a gold mine, said Michael. Chapter 8:17. Another world within the demon's grave. Killing the bat was only the first step of his big plan in the demon's grave. Michael didn't slow down or seek shelter despite the raging storm and the heavy rain. Granted, the storm and the rain made the terrain wet and walking difficult, but it also terrified the monsters. Everywhere Michael looked, he saw no monster. Even the colossal bull he saw from the mountain was nowhere to be seen. Lightning cracked the red sky, sending heaven's light through the storms. Even the rain came in orchestrated rhythm, appearing as the master of the scene yet arriving on unheard cues. The wind ran as if it had been restrained for time out of mind, and it was determined to outrun any chaser. The sound of it was a strange song, as if howling yearned for a melody. Michael was completely drenched in the rain. We've been walking for hours, Sarba said, sitting on Michael's shoulder. Don't you have a spare long coat? I hate getting wet, Iag complained. As she said, Michael wore nothing to cover his upper body except the sheath on his back. In his deep thinking, Michael didn't hear Iag and Sarba. Instead, he was more focused on forming alchemy formulas in his head. There were no monsters or a threat to break Michael's concentration. He didn't even mind the raging storm. He's not listening to us, is he? Asked Iag as Kane shook his head. Michael crossed the meadows after almost 5 hours and saw a lake in the distance. Michael's destination was deep within the lake, according to the system. Thanks to his alchemist profession, Michael concocted a pill that enabled him to breathe underwater. If it wasn't for the high pressure under the lake, he could have used his mask. Since it wasn't the case, Msiel had to connect this pill using extremely rare herbs from his herbal garden in the Sunrise sect. Even in an eerie place like the demon's grave, the lake glistened like a ruby under the red sky. In that land of creeping beauty lay a disk of brightest red. The lake was brighter than the colors of one's dreams. It was the minerals of the glacier that shone cyan, turquoise, and ruby red. Like a mirror on the wall, it was oval and flat. The surface was forever guarded against the winds by the crown of barren hills around. At the edge, the land met and carried right on as a perfect reflection. Looking up into the sky and down into the water was just the same. Although Michael sensed several monsters around him, none dared to attack him. Michael had a feeling the red lightning bolts around the dark swords had something to do with it. As usual, he asked the system about these lightning bolts but received no answer from it. Whenever the system went silent when he asked a question, it raised Michael's concern. For instance, the system gave no explanation or answers about the mysterious woman he met outside the demon's grave. Sometimes, Michael had to figure things out on his own without the system's help. I hope you like getting wet, said Michael as Iag rolled her eyes. I just said I hate getting wet. You are a jerk, ghost, she bit Michael's ear. Nibbling Iag's head, Michael walked closer and closer to the lake. With a flick of his wrist, Michael took out a sapphire blue pill and tossed it into his mouth. His muscles immediately ached, especially the back of his ears. It felt like someone was burning his skin with cigarettes. The pain lasted for a few minutes. Then Vidora saw several gashes appearing behind his ears. Without wasting any time, Michael dived into the lake, swimming deeper and deeper. As his body moved through the clear water, he was surprised to see the golden sand and the sight around him. The first thing that caught his eye was the variety of sea life. Hundreds of fishes in every color of the rainbow and more swam past him without fearing him. Some big fishes floated lazily as others disappeared with a flick of a bright fin. For a lake in a demon's grave, it was artistic to say the least. Luckily, Vidora didn't need any pill or potion to breathe underwater. They swam along with Michael like expert swimmers. As they were following Michael, their attention turned to the expanse of a coral reef that stretched as far as one could see. They blanketed the golden sand like a colorful bed sheet. Surprisingly, everything underwater was full of color and life. The red light coming from the dark swords illuminated the closest section of the reef, highlighting a formation of corals. Each section of coral was beautifully formed, but none was quite like any other. Michael was tempted to harvest some and put them in the lake near the castle. However, Michael was the type of person who would rather see a flower in a plant than in someone's head. "What is that?" Iag asked her siblings in telepathy, looking at an octopus. The creature peeked its head over through the coral and gawked at them with its big eyes. Soon, the octopus moved through the coral, revealing itself for a moment before shrinking back into a crevasse. A hidden gem amongst corals, one of many. The deeper Michael swam, the prettier the lake turned out to be. Many unknown creatures buried themselves under the sand. The entire lake was like a treasure chest, enclosing unfathomable treasures in ever smallest sliver. Everything was deadly silent around Michael. But this silence was short-lived. Suddenly they heard a chittering noise. When Michael looked over his shoulder, he saw 5 creatures that resembled dolphins skim by. With water all around them, they almost seemed to fly, moving effortlessly, propelling their sleek bodies swiftly forwards with a flick of a gray tail. According to the system, Michael still had a long way to reach his destination. He wondered how the things he needed could exist underwater. A while later, Michael was surprised to see a shipwreck. He wanted to investigate the shipwreck even though it didn't seem to have any treasures. But when he was about to swim toward the wreck, his view was obscured by a huge shark that drifted lazily by, pushing Michael and Vidora aside with the water it displaced. A whale shark, mouth stretched wide to gather food. To Michael's surprise, the shark was at the half-immortal stage. If Michael wanted, he could fight the shark and kill it easily. However, blood might attract more sharks, and if they were also at the half-immortal stage, he would be in trouble. Like it or not, Michael was in their home ground. Besides, he wanted to reach his destination without wasting his energy. After all, who knew how many enemies he would have to face there? Michael slowly swam away from the shipwreck and the shark without making any sound. Finally, when he put a safe distance between him and the shark, a swarm of shining goldfish coiled and winded their way past. They lit the underwater like a swarm of fireflies, sending glints of light in every direction. On the golden sand, oysters and colorful shells were scattered everywhere. They were a living explosion of beauty. Limpets glued themselves to rocks, setting themselves in like jewels in a necklace. Michael scooped up a shell from the sand and put it in the system's storage as a souvenir. Eventually, an archway appeared in his sight. It was definitely man-made and contained a realm tear in the center. Unlike the emerald green realm tear that served as the entrance to the demon's grave, this realm tear radiated an icy blue light. Michael's eyes were lit with excitement. If everything went according to his plan, he could put an end to their financial blunder. Even the god of darkness depended on gold coins to grow his army and build his castle. Michael flapped his legs, dashing toward the realm tear. He was actually surprised, but it made sense. The realm tear made him realize the things he needed were in another realm. A realm within a realm. "This place keeps surprising me," Michael said to himself as he tried to enter through the realm tear. But an invisible force pushed him away. "What the hell?" Michael creased his brows. "What happened?" Iag asked Michael wordlessly. Unlike Michael, Vidora felt no resistance from the realm tear. Once again, Michael moved toward the realm tear, and this time he resisted the force. Michael quickly used his X-ray vision to see an energy dome around the archway. Michael unsheathed his dark swords. Then he swung the swords, cutting the invisible dome. The dark swords cut through the dome. It produced a powerful shock wave that pushed both Vidora and Michael several meters away. Then the realm tear created a suction force that pulled Michael and Vidora along with gallons of lake water. Everything around Michael turned dark. But before he disappeared into the realm tear, He caught Vidora and held them closer to his chest with one hand and the dark sword in the other. Lights out for Michael for a few minutes. Even his X-ray vision turned out to be useless. He felt like he was flying through space. At least the feeling was familiar. After an unknown amount of time, Michael was thrown onto a soft ground. He coughed up the blood and slowly opened his eyes. His eyes adjusted to the light. Everything looked blurry for a few moments. When Michael was finally able to see his surroundings, he was taken aback by surprise. He was on a mountain cliff, overlooking the massive cliffs and towering fjords that crept through the rainforest. Great scarves of cloud swirled around the blue sky. It was a primeval landscape, vast and forbidding. But this wasn't how Michael would describe the place. To him, this realm was magical like a fairy tale land. The trees were alien and most of the realm looked too cyan. There were waterfalls, rivers, and distant flocks of winged creatures. "What is this place?" Vidora asked Michael. They shared the same dumbfounded look on Michael's face. "That's weird," said Sarba. His gaze was locked on Michael's dark sword in his hand. When Michael looked at the sword, he saw no red lightning bolts. But that wasn't the only change Michael noticed. He couldn't feel any energy in the atmosphere. In other words, his cultivation power had betrayed him. Luckily, Michael could still access the system and use the arch-energy crystals to power himself up. "Our god has appeared." Suddenly, Michael heard a thunderous voice in the distance. Somehow, Michael didn't think it was just a coincidence. Soon, a flock of winged creatures shot to the sky through the rainforest. They were on their way to Michael. Chapter 8:18. The Wood Elves and the World of Itnes. The world of Itnes was primitive and inhabited by a race called Zoralines. They were later named the Wood Elves by the Dark Lord. Although the world was affected by the time array when the Dark Lord reset the universe, there were still some remnants of the Dark Lord in Itnes. They worshipped him as their only god. Until 2 years ago, the Wood Elves lived peacefully without major wars. However, everything changed one day. The barrier that kept Itnes hidden from the outside world broke as the soldiers of Skyhall invaded their world and slaughtered thousands of Wood Elves. The Wood Elves fought the Skyhall army with primitive bows and arrows, while the Skyhall used high-powered weapons such as cannons, trebuchets, and wyverns. At that moment, Taskin, a young warrior from the Forest tribe, was risking his life to steal medicine for the wounded villagers and his teammates back home. He was accompanied by his wife, Thilv, and 4 comrades. The Wood Elves called the Skyhall soldiers by the name demons since they brought death and destruction wherever they went. Like most of the Wood Elves, Taskin had coppery skin and hazel eyes. His hair was jet black with a hue of copper red. Compared to the Elves and Dark Elves, Wood Elves were slightly taller and had pointier ears. Contrary to those elves, Wood Elves were kind and friendly. They would have formed an alliance with Skyhall and happily offered them valuable resources if Skyhall chose the path of diplomacy. But no, Skyhall waged war and slaughtered thousands of them without a shred of mercy. All of those deaths and destruction were for the natural resources Itnes possessed. This world was once treasured by the Dark Lord himself, and Skyhall had no clue the Dark Lord was on his way to save the world from them. Taskin and his group were walking through a bluish, ancient forest. It reeked of age. Its woody incense was from centuries of snapping branches crashing to the forest's floor and rotting silently. The composting, organic smell rose up in waves like a miasma. Every sprawling tree they passed under reminded Taskin of a watchful guardian, a silent sentinel of the groves. Taskin and his team used branches and veins to traverse through the forest without making a noise. They knew the forest like the back of their hand. The Skyhall soldiers used contraptions to traverse through the forest when they were in a good mood. Otherwise, they would burn down everything in their path just to travel hundreds of meters into the forest. Hundreds of ancient trees with unlimited potential turned to ashes in their hands. Taskin and his team were on their way to the forest center, where the mother tree was. The mother tree was the oldest in the world, spanning hundreds of acres. The Wood Elves had a ritual of climbing the mother tree which would take months. Countless Wood Elves lost their lives trying to reach the top. The Wood Elves believed they could get the Mother Tree's blessing and hear their god's voice by reaching the top. The deeper Taskin and his team went, the more mystical and spellbinding the forest became. Huge roots spread-eagled the ground, twisting like the great backs of sea dinosaurs. The foliage became thick and lush, forming an arch of fairy-tale sapphire blue above their heads. Arthritic boughs, gnarled with age, dripped their bounty of nuts onto the path. Briars, brambles, and berry trees flanked the trail, making it impenetrable on either side. Shuffling noises came from deep in the interior, deadened by the cunningly woven web of leaves. A troop of winged badgers crossed the winding trail in front of them at one point. They were finishing up their early morning foraging and looked startled to see the wood elves. As if on cue, a blue feather bird erupted from the knot of trees. Soon, a few more of its beaked companions joined the flock, creating a symphony of song. The heart-haunting melody was an elixir for the soul. Their melody used to soothe the wood elves' souls. But after the demons appeared, these birds cried more often than they sang. Despite the ash and smell of blood in the air, the sap-sweet fragrance of the forest washed over them. Finally, Taskin arrived at a wide glade, where the ancient trees fell away, revealing the bespectacled blue sky. The last of the morning stars were glinting like silver earrings, luminous and bright. An ore-gold moon with a blue ring hung quietly in the distance, casting a honeyed sheen over the trees. Taskin and his men sat their backs against a lightning-blasted tree trunk and watched the demon castle in the distance. The demons scorched hundreds of trees, and everything lived in the area to build their castle and the surrounding buildings. Taskin could still hear the cries of his people when the demons first arrived. They built the castle with the wood they got from the mother tree's branches and the roots as defensive walls. Once, a holy site turned into a burial site for thousands of wood elves. Since the Sky Hall sent a total of 1,000 soldiers, they were able to build a castle in a month. The castle had 11 broad, square towers connected by large thin walls made of blue marble stones they mined in Ignes. To mine those stones, the Sky Hall slaughtered an entire tribe that protected and lived in the mines for centuries. Small windows were scattered generously around the walls in seemingly perfect symmetry, along with symmetric crenellations for archers and artillery to shoot down the wood elves who dared to get near the mother tree. A huge gate with heavy metal doors guarded the castle. It was the only easy way in. Any other side would be futile. Various barracks, camps, and small buildings were scattered outside the castle gates. The soldiers and some of the merchants who were related to Sky Hall elders lived in those buildings. Taskin and his men had no idea who lives in the castle as none of them stepped into the castle. This castle was the most protected place in the entire world. Daring to invade the castle would only result in certain earth. Luckily, Taskin and their men had no need to go into the castle. Instead, their target was one of the infirmary buildings where the Sky Hall soldiers kept healing potions. "We should wait for the nightfall and then strike," Vaikok, one of Taskin's men, suggested, only to see Thilv shake her head. "We don't have time. They need those magical potions Essie." Taskin nodded. "She is right. Time is not in our favor." "It's now or never," said Taskin. His voice betrayed him, showing his uncertainty and worry about the plan. Deep down, Taskin knew attacking the demons in broad daylight was nothing short of suicide. Still, they had to do it for the sake of their people. 50 lives depended on them and the magical potions. Taskin's men sighed. Although they all knew the plan was suicidal, they would follow Taskin to hell itself. After all, if it weren't for Taskin's leadership, they would have died along with thousands of other wood elves when the demons first invaded them. Moreover, Taskin was the only wood elf who managed to kill one of the demon generals and steal one of their weapon shipments. Unfortunately, the wood elves lacked the technical knowledge to assemble the weapon to its full form. "Vaikok, go and scout the area ahead. Do not get caught," said Taskin. Vaikok, the brown-haired wooden elf, nodded and slowly crouched forward. As the team scout, recon was his job. Hugging the tree, Vaikok slid down to the ground like a monkey. He used the foliage to his advantage. But there was no foliage once he entered the castle land. The Sky Hall soldiers knew how the wood elves operated. Steel was the one and only advantage the wood elves had over them. Therefore, the Sky Hall soldiers cut down everything, including trees and bushes, around the castle. Vaikok used the huts and buildings to hide and walk around. He took a mental note of how many soldiers and the paths of their patrol. Meanwhile, Taskin, his wife and the 3 other wood elves waited for Taskin to return. Suddenly they heard a loud explosion near the castle. Black smoke rose through one of the castle towers. "By the name of the Dark Lord, what is that?" "Must be one of their new weapons," Thilv gritted her teeth. "Once the Dark Lord's blessing returns to our people, we will pay them back several folds," said Thilv. "No god came to our aid when they slaughtered our people, Thilv. If we want to change our fate, we have to fight for it," rebuked Taskin. "Do not speak like that, Taskin. We must pray to the Dark Lord when the time of our needs. He will definitely answer our prayers." Taskin did not want to argue with his wife. The Wood Elves were a God-fearing race that worshipped the Dark Lord for thousands of years. They didn't see him, but they worshipped his statues, which protected them for centuries. However, after the demons invaded them and slaughtered thousands, some of the Wood Elves like Taskin lost their trust in the Dark Lord. One couldn't blame them for losing faith in a higher power after witnessing their race being pushed to the brink of extinction. Taskin had no faith in a god who didn't raise a finger against the demons, unlike his wife. Eventually Vaikok finished his recon and returned to them. 20 fully armored guards on the way to the infirmary, Vaikok reported back to Taskin. Did you see the healing potions? Asked Thilv as Vaikok nodded. But he didn't have any excitement or even the slightest joy in his eyes. Instead, Vaikok seemed like something had affected him deeply. What did you see, Vaikok? He is here, Taskin, said Vaikok with a grave tone. His eyes contained fear and worry like never before. General Tar? Asked Taskin as the others looked terrified except for Thilv, whose eyes burned with rage and bloodlust. Reports said he was looking for something in the mines. Taskin creased his brows. This mission got a whole lot tougher with Tar being on the castle ground. If this were any other day, Taskin would have opted to back off. But today he must retrieve those potions. His brother's life depended on the healing potion. Chapter 8:19. General Tar was an orc assigned by the Sky Hall to build the castle and pacify the locals in Ignis. Unlike a typical orc, Tar was a war-hungry death merchant who preferred to kill than ask questions. Single-handed, Tar killed thousands of wood elves. Taskin and Tar had a bit of history between them. After the Sky Hall invaded the wood elves, Taskin fought Tar to rescue his team and actually managed to achieve such an impossible task. Moreover, Taskin gave a scar that Tar still hadn't forgotten. But unlike Tar, Taskin didn't thirst for a rematch. Instead, Taskin only wanted to steal the healing potions and get the hell out of this place. Follow my lead, said Vaikok. Vaikok, you know the way. Take the lead, said Taskin. The wood elves climbed down the trees and headed toward the infirmary. They moved as nimble as the wind itself. One could barely hear their footsteps. The armored soldiers' heavy boots' clunking sound masked Taskin and his men's movements. Step by step, the wood elves moved closer to the encampments. Soon, Taskin noticed a demon armed to the teeth patrolling between the two camps. Some of the soldiers were sleeping in each camp. This armored soldier turned around and stood between the camps for a few moments. He seemed exhausted after walking back and forth wearing the heavy armor. Outside Ignis, they had arch energy and were powerful enough to lift even boulders. Hence, wearing armor was no headache for them. Besides, they could achieve more protection with a spell instead of this armor. The Sky Hall soldier sweated bullets inside the metal armor. Taskin slowly took out the bow hanging on his back. He knocked an arrow and aimed for the gap between the soldier's helmet and shoulder. After taking a deep breath, Taskin released the arrow. Jirich, the metal soldier groaned as Thilv grabbed the soldier before he hit the ground. If he fell down, the metal armor would make a sound loud enough to wake the soldiers sleeping inside the camps. While dragging the soldier back, Thilv unsheathed a crude dagger and plunged it near the arrow, and ended the soldier's life instantly. She then cautiously placed the body on the ground without making a noise. "Let's go," Vaikok whispered as the group moved around the camps. "Where are the potions?" asked Taskin. Vaikok pointed his finger at a wooden building across several camps and soldiers. Fortunately, Vaikok was able to sneak closer to the building using the tents as his cover. Since the Sky Hall soldiers patrolled the area like clockwork, Taskin and his men were confident enough to sneak past them. But the only complication was General Tar and his wolves. These wolves were specially bred to track down wood elves and their tribes. Each wolf was ferocious enough to rip a wood elf apart in a few moments. Just thinking about the wolves, Taskin's shoulder ached. He looked at the deep claw mark on his right shoulder for a moment before following Vaikok behind. One by one, Taskin and his men moved past the camps. For some reason, it didn't feel right to Taskin. Not a single soldier spotted them as things went pretty smoothly. But that was what worried Taskin. Vaikok halted his steps behind a wooden building, taking advantage of the shade provided by the roof. The team stopped for a few moments to catch their breath. "Something's bothering you, my love?" Thilv turned her gaze at Taskin. The dark lines on his forehead betrayed how worried he was. "Everything's going smooth. Too smooth to be exact," said Taskin. His words surprised Vaikok and the others. As far as they were concerned, if anything, Taskin should feel grateful that everything was going in their favor. Instead, Taskin looked worried to the core. Taskin sighed, looking at their confused faces. "Not to jinx things, but when was the last time everything went according to our plan? Those demons always pulled one over us whenever we thought we had them cornered," said Taskin. "I understand how you feel. But this is not the time for second thoughts. We are deep within the belly of the beast. If we don't get those potions, people are going to die," Thilv said in a low-pitched voice. She cared more for her people than anyone, including Taskin. Unlike her, Taskin wasn't born into her tribe. On the contrary, Taskin was an orphan. Thilv's uncle found him in the forest and raised him as his own. They fell in love at a young age, and Taskin had to climb the top of the mother tree to get Thilv's father's blessing to marry Thilv. Taskin was one of the few who managed to complete such a task and lived to tell tales about it. Taskin nodded, pushing all the doubts and uncertainties to the back of his mind. This was no time for second-guessing, as Thilv said. To their sake, Taskin had to look confident even though he wasn't. He signaled Vaikok to lead the way with his eyes as the wood elf slowly walked around the building. Suddenly, a loud bell rang from the castle. Their bodies went rigid, thinking they were caught for a moment. Midday break. Come on everyone. Take 5, they heard someone calling the soldiers from the center of the camps. Luckily, the soldiers were moving to the center to get their bellies filled. As a result, the patrol routes turned empty and gave Taskin and his men enough leeway to get into the infirmary, take the potions, and disappear into the forest without alerting Tar. At least that's what they planned. In a few minutes, almost every soldier in the area went to the center and formed a circle around a giant cauldron with boiling porridge in it. Meanwhile, the wood elves hastened their steps. They crouched toward the infirmary as fast as they could. Finally, they came to a wooden building with a board with a leaf symbol hanging above the door. Taskin slowly opened the door after looking back and forth. When the door slowly opened, they saw a couple of soldiers sleeping on white beds. These soldiers seemed pale, shivering and gritting their teeth as though they were in great pain. While Taskin's gaze was locked on the 6 soldiers, Thilv and the others noticed the crate full of glistening green vials. There it is. Vaikok closed the door behind them and pointed at the crate. Let's take it and get the hell out of this place, another wood elf behind Thilv said. When Thilv was about to take a step toward the crate, Taskin stopped her by her wrist. If they have the magical healing potions, why do these soldiers look sick? Asked Taskin. As much as the Thilv and the others wanted to take the healing potions and escape the place, Taskin's words made them wonder and think deeply about what he had just said. Vaikok and the others creased their brows. They knew Taskin was right. These magical healing potions could cure anything, yet these soldiers looked anything but healthy. On top of that, the healing potions were right on the table, and the crate contained enough potions for all the soldiers in the room. Yet, for some reason, the demons chose not to give the potions to their comrades. We can think about it when we get back to the tribe. Let's just take them and get the hell out of here, Vaikok rushed Taskin. Seeing no other choice, Thilv quickly dashed to the crate and took it in her hand. On her way back, she wanted to kill the 6 soldiers. But luckily for them, Thilv prioritized escaping the place over slitting their throats. Taskin turned around to leave the building. He threw one last gaze over his shoulder at the soldiers before opening the door. The moment he opened the door, Taskin's body went rigid. His heart almost jumped out of his chest. To their shock, General Tar was waiting outside to welcome them with his 5 gray wolves. General Tar was a brutish, aggressive, ugly, and malevolent orc, contrasting with the wood elves. He had several piercings all over his body and wore a necklace made of his enemy's ears. He held a heavy sword as tall as an average human on his shoulder. When General Tar saw Taskin and his team, he showed an ugly smile that really highlighted his blood-stained teeth and the tusks sticking out of his mouth. The gray wolves bore their teeth with their blue eyes glimmering with ferocity. They were one signal away from ripping Taskin and the others apart. Each wolf was 5 feet wide and tall as a wood elf's waist. Saliva trickled down their mouths as though Taskin and his men were juicy pieces of meat. To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? General Tar had a perfect brutish voice for his monstrous body. He slowly ran his hand through the deep scar on his left cheek. Tar almost went blind in one eye. If Taskin swung the sword a few inches higher and Tar would have lost his left eye. Tar wore the scar as a symbol of shame. Until he could wash his face with Taskin's blood, Tar had no plans to rest easy. General Tar, Taskin stopped in front of his men, shielding them with his body. The soldiers behind Tar raised their swords and handheld crossbows at Taskin. Tar's men were in the number hundreds, while Taskin only had 5 men. No matter what strategy they used, there was no chance for them to win this battle. You gave me something to remember you by. It's only fair I return the favor. Don't you think so, men? General Tar asked. Yes, General, Tar's men shouted in unison as Tar brought down the heavy sword to the ground from his shoulder. It seems like our friends are here to take the healing potions meant for our men, said Tar. We can't have you take what's ours unless, Tar's words trailed. Unless what? Thilv snarled. Unless Taskin bests me in a duel, Tar said, looking Taskin in the eyes. But you always have the option to run away. In that case, my babies will be more than happy to give a chase. You have 3 seconds to decide. Tar raised 3 fingers. 1, 2, I accept, Taskin stepped forward, having no other choices. Outrunning the wolves and the soldiers was nothing but suicide. At least by fighting Tar, he could pull a surprise move on Tar that might let his wife escape the place. Chapter 820. Michael being a god. When Michael heard the echo in the distance, he was surprised. Soon, many figures riding winged beasts appeared on the horizon. These beasts resembled giant butterflies. Having no idea what was happening in the world, Michael remained on the hilltop, waiting for the figures to come to him. While they were flying toward him, Michael accessed the system's storage and took out the cultivation device. After a long thought, Michael named these devices Olympus. He wore the Olympus around his wrist and willed the system to use the refined arch-energy crystals in the storage. Olympus warmed up slightly as the black device tightened around his wrist. Soon, Michael felt a surge of energy within his body. These refined arch-energy crystals boosted his cultivation power to the core formation level. In a world without energy, a core formation warrior would be a god. Eventually, the giant butterflies descended down to the hilltop, revealing their riders. To Michael's surprise, those who rode the butterflies looked similar to the elves but had brownish skin and pointier ears. Furthermore, they looked primitive. The men wore a piece of a dress made of various leaves around their wrists, covering their manhood, while the women wore leaves covering their breasts and womanhood. Still, the dress made of leaves barely covered them. Even the bows and arrows they had looked ancient and primal. As soon as the wood elves saw Michael, they screamed and raised their hands to the sky. Their eyes were filled with disbelief and shock. They quickly jumped to the mountaintop from the mount and knelt before Michael. Michael saw them knocking their heads against the ground like they were asking for forgiveness. "This isn't the welcome I expected," Sarbo whispered. Michael shared the same thought. The wood elves bent their knees and went on with the ground. They didn't even dare to look him in the eyes. He turned his gaze to the elder elf, who wore some kind of hat with feathers and held a staff. With a hunchback and a staff to hold his body straight, the old elf looked like a typical village elder who was wise and old. "Dark Lord," the old elf's voice stuttered. It was not because of his old age but because of the respect and fear he had toward the Dark Lord. The old man trembled even to raise his head before Michael. At that moment, almost 30 wood elves and their mountains knelt before Michael, waiting for him to speak. Since Michael was caught off guard by the god thing in another world, it took him a few moments to find his next words. Never in a million years did Michael think he would find an entirely new world with elves who worship him as their god. "All right. Everyone stand up," Michael ordered them. The village elder and the other wood elves almost immediately rose to their feet as though they were programmed to obey every one of his commands. Tears gushed out of the village elder's eyes. Even some of the male wood elves sobbed with joy and delight. But deep within their eyes, Michael saw the desperation for help. Some of the elves had deep scars and wounds still covered with green paste. Those marks were perfectly straight, like a sword cut or a spear slash. Michael knew without a doubt that these elves were fighting someone. Judging by their weapons and clothes, anyone with a sword and better armor could slaughter these elves. So unless the elves were fighting unarmed goblins, they had no chance of winning the fight. The old elf tried to remain straight with the help of his staff. "I knew you would answer our prayers, Dark Lord," the old elf said, sobbing uncontrollably. Tears gushed out of the old elf's eyes. Michael pretty much had no idea what was happening. But he took a deep breath and decided to deal with the wood elves, who seemed to worship him with every fiber of their bodies. Even the members of his dark army didn't look as loyal and faithful as these wood elves. Suddenly, Michael heard a thunderous scream in the distance. Suddenly, a red smoke rose to the sky through the forest. The place where the red smoke was coming from was the same place these elves came from. "What is that?" asked Michael, moving his gaze to the red smoke in the distance. "Call for help, Dark Lord," the old elf answered. Intense fear glistened in his old eyes. "We should try helping them. These elves seem desperate," Iag whispered in Michael's ears. Among the 3 heads, Iag was the least merciful one. But even she felt pity for the elves and wanted to help them. Michael was not going to ignore them when they seemed to worship him as a god. They were like the Dark Army, only more loyal and faithful. "Then I should answer the call for help." Michael slowly ascended into the air as the elves gasped in shock. Their faces went pale. The village elder looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Lead the way," said Michael, hovering in the air. It took a few moments for the elves to snap back to reality. Then they climbed onto their mounts and flew toward the red smoke. On their way, they stared at Michael with awe and disbelief. Their expressions were beyond words. On the other hand, Michael was in love with this new world. Everywhere he turned, he saw lush forests with magical birds and sapphire blue trees that glowed like neon lights. The air smelled fresher than any other cultivation continent. Magical was the word that appeared in his mind when looking at the world. The golden butterflies flew through the air like fancy kites. The butterfly with the elder on top flew relatively close to Michael, and eventually, a cozy village built on top of the trees appeared in Michael's sight. Michael was in awe, wondering how these elves managed to build a village around the trees above the ground. The tree houses he saw when he visited the Dark Elves were a far cry from this village. Through the giant blue trees, Michael vaguely saw a giant wooden pillar where the wood elves gathered around. The source of this content is nov/l/bin/net. Little wood elves bounced up and down, waving their hands, seeing the butterflies in the air. The grown-ups, however, looked tense and clenched their hands together against their chests. They were praying for their god to return. Through the canopy, Michael descended to the ground. Countless wood elves gasped and cried out loud. Just like the village elder and the wood elves accompanied him, the villagers dropped to their knees immediately after seeing Michael. Our God has answered our prayers. We are saved. Dark Lord. The villagers shouted out loud. Looking at them, Michael couldn't help wondering how they quickly identified him as their god. But he soon got his answer when Sarba asked him to turn around. You should see this, Michael heard Sarba's startled voice. As he slowly turned around, he saw a wooden carving of a man in the tall wood pillar. Although the features were not precise, he resembled Michael. The two swords on his back and the hydra on his shoulder were dead giveaway. He turned his back on the wood elves and stared at the wood carving for a few minutes. The wood elves didn't dare to utter a word. As a result, silence returned to the place. Strangely, the carving's eyes were radiating a dim light. When he looked closer into the eyes, Michael noticed a rune in each eye. It was so tiny that an average human or a wood elf wouldn't notice. Finally, Michael turned around to greet the wood elves and hear why they called for help. You. Michael's gaze swept across the wood elves and landed on the village elder. The village elder raised his head to look Michael in the eyes. Stand up, said Michael. What's your name? Michael asked the elder. Karat, Dark Lord, the village elder answered with the utmost respect and reverence toward Michael. Michael nodded, flicking his wrist as the throne made of skulls and bones materialized behind Michael. He sat down and put one leg atop the other. The wood elves were once again startled by a simple act such as this. To the wood elves who grew up without arch energy or cultivation, everything Michael did was nothing short of a miracle. Now tell me why you called for help, Michael asked Karat. The demons, Dark Lord. We are failing in the fight against the demons? Demons? Michael and Vidora were stunned by Karat's answer. They immediately thought of Azazel and his race. But Michael was skeptical about the demon thing. He never thought the wood elves named the Sky Hall soldiers the demons. To be honest, the wood elves didn't even know there was a separate race called demons that existed in the universe. Are these demons here to punish us because of something we did or didn't do, Dark Lord? Are you punishing your children? Michael almost coughed up blood after hearing the elder address themselves as the children. But he had to keep a straight face and go along with this. After all, godhood did come up with some quirks like this. Besides, it didn't seem like a good idea for them to tell the wood elves the truth about the universe. Instead, Michael planned to be their beloved god. This way, Michael would have an entire population working for him, collecting everything he needs and being loyal to him in exchange for protection. How long have you been fighting these demons? Surprisingly, Cain questioned the elder for some reason. Since 2 years ago, Lord Cain, the elder surprised Michael by addressing Cain using his realm name. Moreover, he came to this world 2 years ago. It seemed like the demon attack and his appearance had some kind of connection. How do they know our name? Iag whispered into Michael's ears. And demons? Are they really fighting the demons? Asked Sarba. Suddenly, Michael sensed someone rushing toward them in his environment scanning. When he looked over the crowd of wood elves, he saw a wood elven woman land on the wood platform using a rope lift mechanism. We have to save Taskin, the woman said before collapsing down. Chapter 821. God to the rescue, Thilv. Michael heard a wood elf cry out loud. Still, the wood elf and who seemed to be his wife, didn't dare to move without Michael's permission. It was obvious the wood elf who just fainted due to probably blood loss was their loved one, but instead of rushing to her aid, the couple looked at Michael with eyes pleading for mercy. Karat, bring her to me, Michael ordered the village elder. The wood elf old man immediately signaled Thilv's parents as they carried Thilv to Michael. The man who carried the woman had a muscular body with several scars, while his wife looked gentle and kind. They both sobbed, seeing the sorry state of their daughter. Thilv had several deep claw marks on her back and a deep stab wound on the side of her chest. Blood spurted out of her wounds, resulting in her body looking pale. Karat and the Wood Elves placed Thilv on Michael's feet and knelt before him. "Dark Lord, please save our daughter," they cried out loud. Michael stood up from this throne and took a few steps toward the wounded Wood Elf. He sat beside her before taking out a sparkling healing potion. Under the Wood Elf's shocked gazes, he gently opened Thilv's mouth and poured the healing potion into her mouth. The Wood Elves were no strangers to the healing potions. They saw the Skyhall soldiers use these potions on a battlefield to heal themselves completely. It was one of the many reasons why the Wood Elves got decimated mercilessly by the demons. The wounds on Thilv's body magically disappeared under their gazes. Her hands twitched slightly as she slowly regained consciousness. Any other normal healing potions would have failed to save her because of the blood loss. But Michael gave her one from his personal stash, which could supplement her blood loss and heal her completely. Ack! Suddenly Thilv rose up from the floor, gasping for air. It took her vision a few seconds to adjust to the new sight. When everything cleared up, she saw a strange face looking at her. She immediately tried to crawl back and reach for her dagger in utter shock, but Karat and her parents grabbed her by her hands. "Thilv. Thank the Dark Lord. The source of this content is nov/l/bin/net, my precious." Thilv's mother and father embraced her tightly as the entire tribe looked stunned by Michael's mercy. Michael returned to his throne, letting the family have some warm moments, although he doubted this would last, judging by the wounds on her body. Thilv hugged her parents tight as she sobbed uncontrollably. A few minutes later, Karat and her parents dropped a nuke on her head. Thilv's face paled when her gaze fell on Michael. The god she had prayed for since she was a little kid was sitting before her. Not a single day passed without Thilv praying to the Dark Lord. It was her true wish that the Dark Lord would appear in front of her one day. But she didn't know it would actually happen. The Dark Lord looked more imposing and radiant than the wood carving. Her heart almost jumped out of her chest when he smiled at her. As much as Thilv wanted to grab his feet and cry out loud, she didn't have time to do so. Taskin was fighting Tar as they spoke. He and her comrades risked their life so she could escape. Realization hit her as the Dark Lord may be the only person who could save her husband. Hence, she dashed at the Dark Lord and dropped to her knees before Michael. She looked up with her hands clenched against her chest. "Please save my husband, Dark Lord." Michael guessed she might put a request like that after he saw the wounds. Luckily for the Wood Elves, Michael decided to help them. Plus, he was curious to see these demons they talked about. These people had been worshipping him, so the least he could do was help them get some peace. Besides, he felt like it was his duty to protect these people. Perhaps it was their loyalty or the fact they worshipped him, but he wanted to help them. Michael unsheathed a dark sword as the Wood Elves took a step back. They trembled at the sight of Michael's black sword. He dropped it to the ground and rose from his throne. Thilv still remained at his feet, begging for his help. He stepped on the sword and turned his gaze down on her. "Step onto the sword and hold my hand tight." At first, Thilv was confused but eventually did as she was told. After all, she had no time to waste, and her god had ordered her to climb on the sword. "Dark Lord, please allow us to accompany you," said Karat, only to see Michael shake his head. "No need. I will be back soon." As he said, the black sword slowly ascended into the air, carrying Michael and Thilv. But before Michael could shoot into the air, Vidora made a request to Michael. "Would like to stay with the villagers." Although Michael was surprised, he didn't see any harm in leaving Vidora with the Wood Elves. Michael nodded as Vidora jumped back to his throne. After leaving Vidora on the throne, Michael flew straight through the canopy to the sky. Thilv let out a squeal as she grabbed Michael's hands tight. When he rose to the air, Michael saw a colossal tree in the distance. Even the giant bull he saw in the demon's grave would look small in front of this tree. The black smoke rising from the ground near the tree and the castle looked out of place to Michael. Even from afar, Michael could smell the metal and pollution in the air. For a few moments, Michael stopped flying and looked around the world. His blood boiled when he saw countless forest fires and dark smoke rising to the sky. Only a fool would think they happened naturally. He knew that whoever built the castle near the mother tree was responsible for all the destruction. He could only imagine how many precious plants and wildlife the fire had engulfed. Such a waste of resources and destruction of nature raised his killing intent to another level. "You might want to hold me tighter," said Michael. Thilv nodded as she grabbed his hands tighter than before. Suddenly, everything around her blurred. Her face ached because of the speed. It was a miracle her leaf dress remained intact when she appeared directly above the encampments, where she saw Taskin and others bleeding to their deaths on the ground. "There they are," Thilv pointed her fingers at the ground. To Michael's surprise, an orc was beating the life out of some wood elves. But when he looked closer at the soldiers, he was disappointed and surprised at the same time. The reason for his disappointment was they weren't demons but elves and humans in metal armor. On the ground, Taskin and his men tried to pick themselves up, but Tar had broken their legs with a wooden club. When the duel between Tar and Taskin began, the orc used a pill to enhance his strength to ensure his victory against Taskin. A fair duel would have gone in Taskin's favor, but it was far from a fair duel. At least Taskin managed to use a primitive smoke bomb that blinded Tar and his men temporarily, which gave Thilv enough time to escape into the forest. However, the Skyhall soldiers and the wolves managed almost to kill her. Luckily they didn't know the forest like Thilv knew. Now Taskin and his men just hoped Thilv escaped to the tribe. They didn't even want backup because sending backup to save them was equal to sending the wood elves to their death. Taskin's legs looked crooked as Tar slowly walked toward him. The ugly orc had an even uglier smile on his face. Suddenly out of nowhere, a bolt of lightning struck the ground between him and Taskin. Only then did these Skyhall soldiers look up at the sky. When they realized what just had happened, Michael landed on the ground, creating a shock wave that sent the orc flying away. The Skyhall soldiers were terrified as the dark sword slowly descended to the ground carrying Thilv. "Give these to them." Michael threw a bunch of healing potions to Thilv like they were candies. "Taskin!" she cried out loud as she dashed at Taskin. His face was swollen and almost unrecognizable. Because she was with the Dark Lord, Thilv had no fear in her heart. Meanwhile, the Skyhall soldiers looked tense. Before they could react, Michael dashed at Tar. The big ugly orc was trying to pick himself up. Instead of waiting for the orc to stand up, Michael grabbed him by his head and cast the cloud of darkness and death range. The area immediately grew darker, which terrified the soldiers around Michael. The orc groaned. His big green eyes were filled with shock. Without giving the orc any time to retaliate, Michael cast the Soul Eater. Michael could have easily returned the favor by beating the crap out of the orc, but he chose to kill the orc quickly to show his overwhelming powers. After all, Michael had the reputation of a god to protect. The dark smoke shrouded the orc as everyone heard the orc's sickening cry of agonizing pain. His scream echoed through the lands. Soon, the Skyhall soldiers noticed a bright smoke leaving Tar's eyes and going into Michael's mouth. The orc's once bulky monstrous body shriveled under their shocked gazes. When Michael let go of the orc, Tar looked more like a mummy than an orc. Taskin and the others couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. "Who is he?" Taskin asked with a stuttering voice. Everything that happened before his eyes was nothing short of a miracle. He even thought this was just a dream. Meanwhile, the Skyhall soldiers lost the color of their faces behind the helmets. Some of them outright fell to the ground due to the cloud of darkness effects. Michael slowly turned his gaze to the Skyhall soldiers. Black lightning crackled around his arms, threatening to strike every single soldier in the area. "Shall we begin?" Michael's words swept across the land and put the fear of God in their hearts. Chapter 8:22, God's Wrath. The Skyhall soldiers who received the name demons from the Wood Elves took a step back. Their eyes shimmered with fear behind their helmets. Michael cracked his finger one by one. His movements were slow but contained deep hatred and killing intent. Despite the morning sun and its brightness, the place darkened when he cast the death range. Michael was already at core formation level 2 because of the Olympus, as the death range boosted his cultivation 4 levels high. Taskin and the others felt a chill running down their spines just by hearing the crackling lightning bolts dancing around Michael. The dark sword on the ground slowly ascended into the air and landed in Michael's hands. As though the sword had sensed Michael's killing lust, it produced a myriad of lightning bolts. In the darkness, the dark swords radiated a dim red light because of the lightning bolts. The Skyhall soldiers were stupefied. They were literally in the dark, having no clue how Michael was using spells and arch-energy and itinies. These soldiers were at the bottom of the Skyhall hierarchy. Hence, they received no artifacts or scrolls that could have helped them escape Michael's wrath. The only option they had was the portal within the castle. But they doubted they would be able to move past him. "Kill him, Dark Lord!" Thilv shouted like a wounded beast thirsting for payback. The others were too stunned after hearing the human before them was their god. Even Taskin began regaining faith in their god, the Dark Lord. Michael slowly raised his sword toward the sky as the clear sky immediately darkened. Storm clouds as gray as ash came out of thin air, followed by rumbling thunder. Flashes of lightning struck across the sky, indicating the upcoming bloodbath. Then hundreds of black lightning bolts struck the ground. Thilv and the others quickly closed their eyes instinctively. Soon they heard screams and felt the electricity in the air. Their neck hair stood up as they tasted blood and metal in the air. The lightning storm continued to strike down, slaughtering the soldiers on the ground. Hundreds of lives were snuffed out in a few minutes. All that remained on the ground was hollow, melted armor, scorched bones, and bits and pieces of the Sky Hall soldiers. When Thilv opened her eyes, she couldn't believe her eyes. It took her brain a few moments to process everything that happened. They learned from the village elder that the Dark Lord was a vengeful god, and he lived up to their expectation and more. Gradually, the darkness faded away, letting the sun bathe the ground with its brightness. In the light, the ground looked more terrifying. The ground was littered with the Sky Hall soldiers' remains. Michael was happy with the output. These soldiers deserved no mercy nor the right to breathe another day in this beautiful world that belonged to him. Michael turned his gaze back to Thilv and the men. Collect the armor and their weapons, Michael ordered the wood elves. Their bodies moved without their consent like robots. With their nimble fingers and hands, they plucked the weapons and armor left behind by the Sky Hall soldiers. Most of the armor was melted just like their weapons. The lightning storm did a number on them. But to a talented blacksmith like Michael, it was not a big deal for him to repair the armor and weapons. The first and foremost thing on his to-do list was fixing the clothing issue. He couldn't have his future army of wood elves running around, looking like primitive monkeys. Michael was about to head toward the castle when he heard angry growls from behind. The wood elves froze as Michael turned back to see 4 wolves baring their teeth. The wolves were completely stupid and oblivious to the fact Michael could kill them with a flick of his wrist. "Hey kitty," Michael teased the wolves. Step by step, the wolves approached Michael. They surrounded Michael to pounce him from every direction. Suddenly the wolves leaped at Michael. Then, the wood elves saw a ring of dark flames like they had never seen before pulsating from Michael. The dark flames reduced the wolves to ash as their bones crumbled down to the ground before they could reach Michael. He could have killed them using varieties of ways. Some of them were really creative and brutal. But Michael chose to kill the soldiers using the fastest way to show his overwhelming power to the wood elves. He wanted them to witness his power so they would continue to worship him and serve him loyally to their last breath. In exchange, he would protect this world and the residents as he was meant to be. Michael then looked at the sky. For some reason he felt like his past self was smiling at him. Leaving the wood elves to their task, Michael disappeared from their sight. The wood elves only saw a couple of black lightning bolts in the air, which trailed toward the castle. In a blink of an eye, Michael appeared in the throne hall, moving past all the soldiers outside. Lustrous braziers, half enclosing each of the 10 onyx columns, lit up the lower levels of the throne hall and engulfed the throne hall in a brilliant glimmer. The paintings of vast landscapes on the arched ceiling danced in the flickering light while statues looked down upon the porcelain floor of this regal hall. For a castle built in a hurry, they really put some effort into decorating the throne hall. Michael couldn't help wondering who was the ruler of this castle. He walked toward the noble throne of carved rock that sat 20 or 30 steps above the ground. The throne was covered in hallowed carvings and intricate runes, and fixed on each of the broad ears was a sapphire rose. The light pillows were a light teal, and these too had been adorned with burnished sigils. A teal rug ran from the throne down the center and looped back from both left and right while square dag banners with gilded tassels swung gently from the walls. Between each banner hung a lantern. None but a few have been lit, illuminating the portraits of angels in their perfectly forged armor. Sunlight peeked through the extensive tinted glass windows edged by veils colored the same teal as the banners. The curtains had been adorned with impressive needlework and emblazoned edges. Michael walked around the throne hall like he owned the place. He could hear the heavy boots clanking as the Sky Hall soldiers rushed into the throne hall. The soldiers were still contemplating what had just happened. A few minutes ago, several things happened at once. First, they were patrolling the castle grounds as usual. Then they saw the sky darken, followed by a violent lightning storm, something they had never seen before in this world. The lightning storm lasted for a few moments before completely vanishing into thin air. They wanted to check the place, but before they could do it, they saw a strong breeze of wind moving past him. Then they saw a bolt of lightning heading into the throne hall. To their shock, they saw a human roaming around the throne hall when they entered. They never saw him enter the castle. Still, he was there. The only explanation of how he entered the throne hall was by using a spell that defied the rule of this world. Something was wrong, very wrong. The soldiers could feel it. Since these soldiers were stationed away from the Sky Hall for so long, they didn't recognize Michael as the Dark Lord. The soldiers surrounded Michael with their swords and spears pointed at him. Michael stopped at the bottom of the stairs to the throne and turned back. His eyes searched among the armored soldiers for their leader. He expected someone from a higher rank to appear before him soon. As he expected, a tall man wearing full metal armor walked through the soldiers. He was armed to the teeth. The man slowly removed his helmet, revealing his elven features and striking golden hair. "Who are you?" The elf spoke with a gritty tone that showed no warmth whatsoever. Not that Michael expected the elf to be warm when he was trespassing. If it wasn't for the question of how he entered the castle without their knowledge, Michael was sure the elf would have ordered his men to take him down by now. For a moment, Michael did not give the elf any answer. He kinda kept the elves and the other soldiers in the dark. Then Michael cracked his neck and knuckles. "You are a human. Aren't you a long way from home?" asked the elf. "So there are humans in this world?" Michael asked the elf slowly. His words confused the elf a bit. What did he mean by "in this world"? The elf questioned himself. As someone who spent more time in Itnes than Michael, the elf knew the humans lived far away in small groups. Unlike the Cultivation continents, humans were a minority here. They rarely traveled outside their tribes. Yet the elf noticed a human roaming around the castle as he owned the place. Furthermore, the elf was still struggling to grasp how he entered the castle and whether he used arch-energy or not. "You are trespassing. It's a crime punishable by death," the elf threatened Michael. "I could say the same to you," said Michael as the elf frowned. "You trespassed my world. So can you blame me for thinking about killing you all?" Somehow the human's words did not feel like an empty threat. "Your world." The elf creased his sword-like brows. Someone hasn't done his research. "Anyhow, tell the ruler of this place to meet me here, and I will make your deaths as painless as possible," Michael shrugged. Pity he wouldn't get any experience points for killing them, but he at least received badass points. At that moment he had other concerns like finding the one who rules this castle. The orc tar served someone and Michael wanted to know who. In the elf's eyes, the human didn't seem like the person who could be reasoned with or the one who would stand down. He knew a battle was inevitable. As he was about to issue an order to take him down, a majestic voice echoed through the hall. "Stand down." Chapter 823, Deal with the Sky Hall. Michael heard the voice from behind. He slowly turned around to see a hunched-back old woman with pure white hair appear near the throne. Her hair was tied into a bun, and she wore pearl robes adorned with intricate symbols that shined in the light. The old woman climbed down the stairs without a concern in the world. When the elf and the others noticed the old woman, they immediately bowed. The old woman didn't make any gesture to acknowledge the soldiers. Instead, her gaze was locked on Michael. The soldiers knelt down as their heavy metal clanked against the marble floor. "Ghost," the old woman addressed Michael by his name. "So you are the ruler of this castle?" Michael asked the old woman. "Everyone leave," the old woman raised her voice. Her voice sounded like a bell in a silent area. As soon as the soldiers heard the old woman's order, they stood up, turned around and left the throne hall without a word, leaving Michael and the old woman behind. "I am a representative," said the old woman. "Then tell your boss to stay out of this world." "It belongs to me." Michael looked down to match the old woman's eyes. Although he could kill the old woman with a single look, he refrained himself from doing so. "You may have power in this world. But we both know you won't stay here forever. You will return to the Dark Ocean and eventually step foot off the southern continent, leaving Mugashuka's protection. It is wise for you not to cross my higher-ups if you want to survive," the old woman said. She was nonchalant despite knowing Ghost could end her life in a heartbeat. Michael was slightly surprised. The old woman seemed to know more about him. Obviously, she was someone with knowledge about him. "Careful with the tone, Grandma. I can still kill you with a snap of my fingers," said Michael. The old woman just let out a gentle smile. "You can, but you won't. Unless you want the Sky Hall to be at your doorsteps, you will refrain from harming any more of my soldiers," said the old woman. Typical Sky Hall. Don't think I don't know your little act of harvesting netherils and demon skeletons. Also, if the Sky Hall had really wanted me gone, the war would have started already. But here we are. So what does that tell you? Your boss doesn't want me dead for some reason. Michael was just making a guess here. He didn't know he was spot on. As he said, Andor, the god of time and space and the man who controlled the Sky Hall behind the scene, did not want Michael dead. Instead, he was manipulating the events to put Noah and Michael against each other. For him to escape the immortal realm, he needed a god dead. Since the past Dark Lord beat him to near death, Andor hoped the dead god would be Michael at the end of their battle. If you don't cut off your infected arm, you will die. Just like you are an infection to all worlds. Some people are the infected arm. The Sky Hall must do what's necessary to keep the body alive, Nice way to justify genocides and to slaughter innocent people. None who helps you is innocent. The old woman saw lightning bolts appear around his wrist. They crackled, hissing like coiling snakes to shoot her down. Only one thing stopped Michael from ending the old woman's life: his instincts and the system's warning in his head. For some reason, the system went crazy when an urge to kill the old woman appeared in his heart. Michael took a deep breath as the crackling lightning bolts disappeared. "By the looks of it, we both have to do what we don't like," said the old woman. "And what that might be coexists in this world. You can kill anyone, but eventually you will leave this world. Are you willing to gamble on the wood elves' lives that we won't bring the wrath of Skyhall after you're gone?" As much as he hated to admit it, the old woman was right. He wouldn't be able to protect the wood elves forever by staying with them. Judging by the old woman's look in her eyes, he could tell she had some kind of deal to strike with him. "Why do I feel like you're about to propose a deal?" asked Michael as the old woman chuckled. "Indeed I am. It is a simple one actually. There is a land that the locals call the Ash Field, far south of here. You agree to give that land to us and we will stop our war against the locals. What's important about that place?" asked Michael, only to see the old woman shake her head. "You don't have to know. Do not forget we are not allies. On the contrary, we are enemies preparing to face each other in the future. Unlike you, we aren't the gods here. You are. So you have to protect your flock." Michael knew the old woman would have already guessed he would spy on them if he agreed to the deal. But still, the old woman wanted to strike this deal, which made Michael more curious about this Ash Field. "What's about this place that made the Skyhall negotiate with me, the Dark Lord?" Michael questioned himself. Deep down, Michael knew agreeing to this deal was the right thing to do. He could use the time to learn more about this world, especially the Ash Field, and make the Wood Elves and all who worship him stronger. Once he was done with the Wood Elves, they would chase away any invader who stepped into this magical land without his help. To do that, he needed time. Unfortunately, making this deal was the only way he would get more of it. "Do we have a deal?" asked the old woman. "As you said, we both have to do things we don't like." "But," Michael raised a finger, "if any of your soldiers ever stepped a foot outside this Ash Field, you won't deal with Ghost. You will deal with the Dark Lord." The place darkened as Michael said. For the first time, a sliver of fear emerged in the old woman's eyes. "And when I visit this place tomorrow, I don't want to see any more of your soldiers." As he finished his sentence, Michi turned around and walked away from the old woman. There was nothing for him to learn more from the old woman. After Michael left the castle, he noticed the Skyhall soldiers standing in a line, blocking his path. But soon the elf captain signaled the soldiers to clear the path for him. When Michael noticed the elf, his eyes burned with rage and killing lust. If Michael was a betting man, he would say the elf had learned what had happened to his precious men. Michael didn't say anything to antagonize the man. He didn't think it was worth it. "This isn't over," the elf mumbled, just loud enough for Michael to hear him. "You better hope so," said Michael before disappearing from their sight. This time the soldiers confirmed their suspicions. "He is using spells." The elf was speechless, but that didn't reduce his anger toward the human by any means. After leaving the castle, Michael returned to where he had left the wood elves behind. By the time Michael arrived, the wood elves had gathered around a pile of metal armor and weapons. The wood elves immediately dropped to their knees when they saw Michael. Even Taskin, who had previously lost his faith in his god, seemed completely turned to his old ways. "They will leave this place tomorrow. This battle with them is over, but we have yet to win the war," said Michael. Vidora and the villages were waiting for Michael's return. Meanwhile, the wood elves bathed Vidora with everything Iag asked for. The Hydra sat on Michael's throne and asked for every fruit the wood elves had for themselves. The wood elven ladies particularly fell in love with the cute yet terrifying creature that accompanies their god. They spared no expense in showering the Hydra with love and reverence, especially after Iag gave her word that Michael would heal the wounded. The sun slowly descended on the horizon, painting the blue sky with its golden rays. Every tree and plant life in the forest radiated dazzling lights. Darkness brought the real beauty of Idnes. Vidora saw the forest light up as the entire forest seemed magical. Even Cain was in awe of the beauty. With the trees and plants being a natural light source, the wood elves did not need any torches to brighten their village. "What's taking him so long?" Sarba asked his siblings. He was worried. "If you ask me, I'd say he's exploring this world and collecting herbs and stuff. I saw how his eyes lit up when we first arrived in this world," said Iag. She was indeed right. Michael was collecting herbs and exploring the magical forest as they spoke. "That's the reason for his lateness. Look." A child's shout broke Sarba's focus on Iag. Karat limped toward the wood platform's edge and saw Michael and Taskin's men. They are back. Thilv's mother bounced up and down in joy like a child. Eventually, Vidora saw Michael land on the platform as the wood elves knelt down to show him their respect. He just casually waved at them, wordlessly ordering them to rise. Then he came to the throne and sat beside them. "Something's wrong," Iag said, looking at the dark lines on his forehead. "What is it?" asked Sarba. "I made a deal with Skyhall," said Michael.